Brienne stood on the scorched rubble of King's Landing with dusk settling on the city like a fragile shroud. A hot wind blew from the west, carrying the echo of despair that had for so long permeated the city's haggard walls. Yet in this moment she felt a stirring of hope within herself and glimpsed that the people, too, might dare to hope again. Where once there had been utter ruin, now emerged the possibility of something new, something honest and just. She had been offered the crown by an assembly of lords and ladies gathered from across the realm, an offer that had seemed preposterous even as she stood before them, battered sword in hand, her broad shoulders carrying the burdens of duty she had never sought to escape. But she had accepted, in part because she could do no other. Duty had always been the lantern lighting her way, and it led her now to a place she had never imagined. In truth, the immediate aftermath of the final Targaryen defeat had been a whirl of confusion. Daenerys was gone, her dragons scattered or dead, and Jon Snow had disappeared into the north with barely a word. Sansa Stark remained in Winterfell, secure in her domain as queen in the north, though the severity of the realm's fracture had forced a precarious alliance among all the great houses. Tyrion Lannister, that wry and cunning hand of fate, had called for a great council. What was left of the old powers had come together to decide who would rule the Iron Throne if, indeed, it was to remain a seat of power at all. The war had shattered old certainties. In the pale dawn that preceded the council, men and women whispered of new ways, new forms of governance. A few bold or reckless voices even whispered of a land without kings or queens. But for every radical suggestion, there were 10 cynical retorts, so the question turned inevitably to who would be chosen. Brienne had never thought herself a contender, not for a moment. She had always been the outcast child of Lord Selwyn Tarth, overshadowed by the demands of courtesy and delicate ways. Yet as she strode into the gathering, her posture tall, face set in serious lines, eyes reflecting the unwavering clarity of one who tells no lies and expects none from others, she caught the attention of each lord and lady as though she stood a head taller than them. Soft words of support swelled from those who knew her virtue, whispered acknowledgments of her courage in the war, of her unwavering loyalty to the people she served, of her sense of justice that no lord or king had been able to sway. When the time came for nominations, various lords put forth their own claimants, their sullen or proud or cunning airs. Others stepped aside, uncertain. And Tyrion, emerging from the shadows of political manipulation into the earnest light of desperation, proposed Brienne of Tarth. It was a name that carried no known ambition, a name that had saved the Stark girls, had kept sacred oaths, had proven a capacity for compassion in a land that had seen so little of it. A hush fell upon the great council. The wind rattled the ruined windows of the Red Keep, and the ground itself seemed to give a groan of protest, or perhaps relief, that the question had been asked. All eyes turned to Brienne, who froze like a hunted stag. Then she spoke, voice quiet but unwavering, saying only that she had never dreamt of a crown, nor possessed a taste for ruling. But if the realm needed her, she would answer that need, sworn as she was to defend the innocent and uphold justice. The words might have stumbled from a lesser soul's mouth, but from her they rang true as a castle-forged steel blade. And so the decision was made, sealed with the applause of tired men and women who had seen too many horrors to want another cunning or ambitious monarch to tear the realm in twain again. At last, a chance for peace. At last, a chance for a monarch whose reign was based on integrity, not thirst for power. By the time the coronation day arrived, the city had begun to take on a more hopeful air. Rumor spread that the new queen would not ask for kneelings or obeisances beyond what was strictly required. Rumor said she had refused the gilded carriage that had once borne the Targaryen kings, preferring to ride a plain mare so she could see her people face to face as she made the slow journey through the city gates. Those who gathered at the sides of the street saw her that morning, tall, broad of shoulder, resplendent in half-polished armor with the 7-pointed star carved upon her chest and a plain silver circlet in her blonde hair. The people did not shout the customary "Long live the Queen" in drunken, excited unison, for they were still cautious, still battered, many still mourning. But some of the children reached out tiny hands for her to clasp as she passed by on horseback, and one little boy cried out, "All hail the new queen." Perhaps it was the softest of blessings upon a ruler who had never asked to rule. Inside the ruined Red Keep, where the blackened stones seemed haunted by the ghosts of wildfire and dragon flame, a small dais had been erected. The High Lords looked on in various states of guarded approval, curiosity, or faint cynicism. Tyrion waited, cloaked in black and gold, holding a simple crown wrought of steel with the sigil of House Tarth inlaid in shining copper. Ser Davos stood to one side, both an advisor and a friend, his gruff face filled with a mixture of pride and wonder at how the realm had turned. The High Septon, chosen anew after the horrors the faith had endured, stepped forward to recite the ancient words, asking if Brienne would swear to protect the realm, serve the people, uphold the laws and customs of Westeros. She knelt, lowering her head, one massive calloused hand wrapped around the hilt of her sword. She gave her vow in a clear voice, unequivocal and sincere, and finally rose, the crown placed upon her head. So she was made Queen of Westeros with all the burdens that entailed. In a moment that felt more like a knighthood than a crowning, she stood tall in the midst of a broken court. The vow resonated in the silent hall, and a modest cheer went up from the gathering. There was no feast or revelry that day, too many scars, too much to rebuild. Instead, she walked among her future subjects, hearing their pleas and their promises, understanding that her sense of justice, the righteousness that guided her sword, must now guide her every action. She told them simply, "I will do what is right as best I can." And for once, perhaps that was enough for a realm that had grown weary of elaborate lies. Her early days on the throne were fraught with complexities. For one, the Iron Throne itself had been all but destroyed, its metal shards twisted and melted by dragon fire. Many had urged for it to be reforged to stand as a symbol of continuity with the old reigns. Others had whispered that it was an ill omen, a cursed seat that had begot too much bloodshed. Brienne, drawn by intuition as much as any cunning political sense, decided to let the shards remain melted where they were. She had no desire for a show of fearsome power when all of Westeros yearned for stability. Instead, she chose a seat carved from the black oak of the Crownlands, a throne that would be large enough to support her tall frame and strong back, but lacking the spiked intimidation of the old Targaryen seat. It was a queen's seat that was plain, unadorned but for a single sapphire carved at its apex. That gem was both a nod to her father's seat on Tarth and a subtle acknowledgement of her knighthood. The sapphire, as many believed, symbolized the waters around her island home and the clarity of honor. She consulted daily with her council. Tyrion served as her hand. He had proven his value time and time again, though the realm still held mixed feelings about him. Ser Davos was her master of ships, as his experience in naval matters was second to none. Samwell Tarly, too, had found a place in her circle, given stewardship over the realm's knowledge and letters. Maester Samwell, they sometimes jested, though it was not an official title. Many lords and ladies shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they realized how drastically different things were becoming. The Queen entertained suggestions from all corners, implementing small changes that gradually restored faith. She addressed the plight of war orphans, established new codes of conduct for the city watch, reinstituted a measure of autonomy to local lords so they might better tend to their domains and feed their starving people. It was not glamorous work, nor did it produce immediate miracles, but it was earnest and consistent. Over time, the common folk began to whisper that perhaps they had at last found a monarch who cared for more than personal advancement. As the weeks passed, her court received visitors from all across the Seven Kingdoms. Lords from the Vale came with petitions about trade routes blocked by bandits. Storm Lords arrived to request coin for the rebuilding of watchtowers along the coast. Northern envoys representing Sansa Stark brought cordial messages, at least for the moment. The North had not forgotten its dire struggle nor the near independence it had claimed. Still, Sansa understood the realm's precarious position and did not desire yet another conflict. The Queen of the North preferred to test the new queen in King's Landing to see if her old friend Brienne, who had once promised to serve the Stark girls, would rule with honor. Meanwhile, the Riverlands needed crucial repairs to broken castles, and the Westerlands demanded justice for the chaos inflicted during Daenerys's conquest. So many demands. So many needs. In council meetings that stretched late into the night, Brienne listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, her words were deliberate. In the early months, she questioned each lord with straightforward curiosity. How many men do you have to spare to rebuild your roads? How many fields have survived the drought? What do your small folk need in the coming winter? And these pointed inquiries unnerved those used to the pomp and circumstance of monarchy. She was less a queen presiding from lofty heights and more a knight scrutinizing every detail, determined to see the realm mended like armor hammered on an anvil. Tyrion's eyes twinkled in those meetings, for he knew how politics worked, and he recognized that Brienne's honesty was powerful in a land of half-truths. People who came seeking to flatter or bribe were quickly rebuffed, their words falling hollow at her stoic gaze. And when a few ambitious lords made attempts to trick or manipulate her with conjured legal disputes, her gaze only hardened and she cut through each web of lies with direct questions. More than once, those lords left the Red Keep pale and trembling, having realized that though Brienne had no taste for cunning, she was not naive enough to be led astray by false courtesy. Yet a new queen could not expect to reign without pushback. Rumors grew in corners of the realm that a woman knight ruling alone was an offense to the gods. Some said her ancestry was too meager, that Tarth was no great house, that a queen must be more beautiful, more in line with the fabled grace of those who had sat on the throne before. Brienne heard these rumors. She recognized them for what they were: fear, prejudice, the old ways refusing to die quietly. She carried on with her duties, refusing to be cowed by pettiness. When some of these slanders reached her, she responded with measured dignity, typically in the form of actions rather than words. She made certain the laws protecting women and small folk were enforced. She maintained a strong presence among the knights, ensuring her Kingsguard, or Queensguard, as some called them now, remained unimpeachable in their loyalty and conduct. She chose her guard carefully. Podrick Payne served as her personal squire still, though he was fast proving himself a capable knight in his own right, and a handful of knights of proven character rounded out the Queensguard. Among them, 2 were women. An idea that stirred shock at first, but soon found acceptance when people realized how loyal and dedicated these knights were. In time, Brienne's presence alone became a symbol. She visited the slums of Flea Bottom with no ostentation, meeting the poorest residents face to face, instructing the city's stewards to address the shortage of bread and clean water. She directed masons and carpenters to repair the battered walls around King's Landing. Noblemen who objected to the cost were met with a simple, unrelenting statement of priority. If we do not rebuild the city, how can the realm stand united? She toured the fields outside the city, speaking with farmers who had been taxed beyond endurance under Cersei's reign and Daenerys's destructive siege. She allocated funds from the royal treasury to assist them in purchasing new seeds and plow horses. Where once the gold might have been lavished on decadent tournaments, Brienne spent it ensuring a harvest that would feed thousands. Some in the upper echelons of society grumbled that she was too generous to the peasantry, but she only reminded them that hungry peasants turn desperate, and desperation leads to revolt. She would not allow that kind of suffering to fester under her watch. Her next challenge emerged from the Iron Islands. Yara Greyjoy, left in command after the wars, had grown resentful of the monarchy once again. She had pledged fealty to Daenerys when the Targaryen queen promised independence, only to be denied when that dream collapsed under dragonfire and madness. Now she tested the new queen's mettle, sending private letters demanding a revisitation of the Iron Islands' sovereignty. Brienne read the letters at her desk, the candlelight flickering across her stern features. She respected Yara's strength and the hardships the Ironborn had endured. But she also knew that further fracturing the realm might invite chaos, an open door for petty wars. She invited Yara to King's Landing. It was a gamble. If Yara came, it meant she was willing to negotiate. If she refused, then the conversation was over before it began, and that might lead to raids, sabotage, more bloodshed. To Brienne's relief, Yara arrived with a small retinue of tough-looking Ironborn. They were proud. They walked as if each stone of the Red Keep was an affront to their freedom, and yet they came. Brienne greeted Yara in the refurbished throne room. There was no threat in the queen's posture, but neither was there timidity. She offered a small feast in Yara's honor, a prudent diplomatic gesture. Then, behind closed doors, they spoke. Yara demanded recognition of the Iron Islands as a sovereign land. Brienne countered with an offer of partial autonomy. The Iron Islanders might govern themselves as they saw fit, so long as they recognized the broader authority of the crown and refrained from raiding the coasts. Taxes would be significantly reduced from what they had been under previous kings, and the Ironborn would be free to choose their own rulers among themselves. The negotiations were tense, but at their heart lay one shared reality. Both women knew how brittle the realm was, how exhausted from war. Yara, despite her fierce front, was no fool. She saw a queen who had no lust for conquest, who sought stability above all. In the end, an accord was reached, not a perfect one, but one that gave the Iron Islands a measure of freedom while keeping them within the realm, ensuring no immediate outbreak of renewed war. When word of the deal spread, some courtiers murmured that it was weakness on the part of the queen. But wiser heads, and especially the small folk, recognized that anything which kept swords sheathed and ships in harbors was a blessing. Even as Brienne toiled to bring some modicum of stability to the Seven Kingdoms, she wrestled with a quieter turmoil within her. She had spent her life searching for belonging, for acceptance. To be crowned queen did not banish those old insecurities overnight. She often found herself in her bedchamber late at night gazing into the polished metal of her breastplate. She could see her reflection, her square jaw, the slight crookedness of her nose, the scars that marred her cheeks, and she wondered if her father could ever have envisioned his awkward daughter wearing a crown. She thought, too, of Jaime Lannister, the man who had once proven so important to her, who had shown her respect despite his checkered history. He was gone now, vanished in the wreckage of war, his name whispered in half-remembered rumors. The ache of that memory never truly left her. Yet she vowed not to let personal grief overshadow the realm's needs. She found some comfort in her duties as she had always done. Every morning she rose early to spar in the courtyard wearing simple practice leathers. She insisted on maintaining her martial prowess, for she believed that a leader who could not defend her people was no leader at all. She trained with the Queen's Guard, honing their discipline. Her presence in the yard drew small crowds, commoners who watched in awe at the graceful, powerful arcs of her blade. Though she was queen, she did not stand apart from her knights as some lofty figure. She dueled them personally, hammered them with the flat of her blade when they left an opening, and laughed with them when sweat coated their foreheads. In this, she felt more herself than anywhere else. Being queen was a burden, but fighting for what was right was in her blood. One day a caravan arrived from the north. It brought Lady Brienne Manderly, an envoy of House Manderly, along with a retinue of loyal knights and carriages filled with winter provisions. Though the city was enjoying a mild stretch of weather, King's Landing was never truly prepared for the deeper cold that sometimes swept down from the north. With trade routes reopened, the Manderlys were bringing salted fish, grains, and other supplies in exchange for coin and certain privileges in the Crownlands ports. Brienne received Lady Brianna in the throne room, the tall windows letting in shafts of light that glinted off the Queen's simple steel circlet. Lady Brianna, a formidable woman with laughter lines around her eyes, bowed low, then rose to speak proudly of House Manderly's support for the Queen. There was warmth in that meeting, a sense of possibility. The Manderlys were influential in White Harbor. They had gold, a navy, and enough pride to stand toe-to-toe with any of the other great houses. For them to be forging a closer bond with the Queen was a sign that perhaps the North would not remain an isolated kingdom under Sansa forever. Though no one spoke of reuniting the realm under a single banner, the closeness of trade and shared goals was bridging gaps. Brienne made sure to personally thank Lady Brianna, and in that moment she glimpsed how forging alliances through sincerity could help ensure the realm's survival more surely than any show of force. But as the realm began to sense a fragile healing, trouble flared along the Dornish marches. Dorne had historically resisted outside rule. Their swift acceptance of her crowning had been perfunctory at best. Prince Kyle of Dorne, chosen by the region's powerful lords, had initially sent word of neutrality, stating Dorne would neither rebel nor fully acquiesce to demands from the Iron Throne. As months passed, border skirmishes erupted along the Stormlands. Opportunistic raiders from both sides, Dornish bandits, Stormland mercenaries, plundered caravans, kidnapped travelers, and stoked old animosities. Letters from Storm's End reached the Red Keep almost daily, pleading for the Queen to intervene. Brienne consulted with her council, a furrow etched between her brows. War with Dorne, wow. LD be disastrous. The land was too vast, the Dornish too entrenched in their ways, and the realm too fragile for another war. A direct confrontation risked igniting those old flames that had burned for centuries and might encourage other regions to test the crown's strength. Instead, Brienne decided she must negotiate in person. She would ride to Dorne, accompanied by a modest escort, and speak face-to-face with Prince Kyle. Council members objected in a chorus of alarm. This was too dangerous. Tyrion worried that her life might be at risk, but Brienne remained unwavering, pointing out that if she were truly to be a just and honorable queen, she could not hide behind her walls, expecting lords and ladies to heed her pleas from afar. So she prepared for the journey south. She left the Red Keep under the vigilant eyes of a trusted steward, with Tyrion and Davos remaining to manage day-to-day governance. Her personal guard included Ser Marleon, a grizzled knight from the Reach, two of her female knights, and Podrick. They departed in the early morning, the sky tinted with sunrise. Along the road, farmers stared wide-eyed at the sight of their queen traveling without pomp or fanfare, just a handful of companions. At nights, the party stayed in local inns or in the keeps of lesser lords, where Brienne listened to local concerns, took mental notes of the road's condition, the harvest, the fears that lingered in people's hearts. Everywhere she went, people bowed or curtsied awkwardly, uncertain how to act around such a queen. She responded with quiet gratitude, taking note of the orchard that had been raised here, the half-ruined sept there, so that upon returning to King's Landing she might allocate the realm's resources where needed. As they neared the red mountains of Dorne, the air grew hot and the stony landscape spread out like a challenge. Prince Kyle's seat was in Sunspear, but he had agreed to meet Brienne in the more northern fortress of Skerriech, making it easier for her to travel without crossing the brutal desert. She arrived dusty and tired, her face reddened by the unrelenting sun. Dornish guards in flowing sashes stared suspiciously at her party. She detected a faint ring of steel behind every decorative blade. But she kept her head high and approached the fortress gates with the dignity due her station. To her relief, she was greeted civilly and escorted into the cool interior. Prince Kyle was a tall, lithe man, his face angular, his eyes sharp. He wore loose-fitting robes of pale yellow, and at his side hung an ornate curved dagger. He bowed with a flourish, a smile that did not entirely reach his eyes. Brienne inclined her head, matching formality with formality. The negotiations that followed were a dance of words and tensions. She explained that the raids along the marches must cease, that the Stormlands needed peaceful trade routes. Kyle insisted that the Dornish had always been protective of their borders, that the Stormlander raids were as much to blame as Dornish pride. There was truth in his words. Brienne did not deny that some Stormland lords might be stirring old grudges. Over the course of 3 days, they argued, tested each other's patience, and found points of agreement. Brienne found Kyle to be proud but not unreasonable. He agreed to send a contingent of Dornish guards to monitor the borders and punish raiders, provided the Queen would ensure the same from the Stormlands side. Brienne offered reduced taxes on Dornish goods passing through the Crownlands, a gesture of goodwill that Kyle recognized as valuable for his people. She made no threat of war, only a clear statement that if the raids continued, the peace she was trying to build would vanish, leaving all parties worse off. Kyle studied her eyes and seemed to see the resolute truth there. Ultimately, they sealed their accord with a small feast, spiced Dornish wine warming Brienne's stomach as she sipped carefully, mindful not to let her guard down. When she departed, Prince Kyle surprised her by presenting her with a finely wrought spear of Dornish steel. A gift for a knight who has proven her mettle, he said smoothly. She accepted it, acknowledging that though their alliance was tenuous, they had at least chosen to stand on the same side of peace. The ride back to King's Landing felt lighter. The tension in her chest had eased, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. The realm was still fragile, but day by day she was preventing new wars from blooming. Upon her return, she found that life in the capital continued its slow climb toward normalcy. Merchants hawked goods in the marketplace, stonemasons chipped away at broken walls, and the Red Keep bustled with fresh energies. Tyrion greeted her in the throne room, exclaiming that the negotiations must have gone well enough, for there were no urgent letters from Dorne waiting. Indeed, lords and traders from the Stormlands had already reported fewer raids. Brienne permitted herself a small smile. In that moment, standing under the newly replaced windows that allowed sunlight to wash over the throne, she dared hope that her reign might actually bring something better to Westeros. But a queen's burdens do not simply vanish with one accord. The Vale's new young lord, Roland Arryn, continued to impose steep tolls on travelers crossing the mountains, stirring discontent. In the Westerlands, a coalition of Lannister bannermen quietly refused to send their tithes, resentful of the crown's tolerance of the impoverished. Every day brought new letters requiring her signature, new petitions requiring her decision. Brienne moved through these tasks with steadfast determination, though exhaustion often lurked behind her eyes. She did not regret her duty, but she keenly felt its weight. In the privacy of her chambers, she would sometimes remove her crown, run her calloused fingers through her short blonde hair, and reflect on how very strange it was that she, who had once been mocked as Brienne the Beauty, now wore the circlet of a queen. One evening a messenger came bearing urgent tidings from the Reach. Bandits, left over from the war, had been terrorizing travelers on the Gold Road. Lord Tarly, having reclaimed Horn Hill, was doing his best to keep them at bay, but needed reinforcement. The Queen's council was divided. Some argued that it was not the crown's place to send the royal army to every disturbance in the realm. Others insisted the banditry threatened trade routes, which in turn threatened the stability of the capital. Brienne listened, then decided. She would dispatch a contingent of crown-funded knights to assist Horn Hill's forces, ensuring the region stabilized. Better to quell such threats early than let them fester. That very night, she penned personal letters to the knights she had chosen for the task. She reminded them that their duty was to protect the innocent, not to brutalize local populations indiscriminately in the hunt for bandits. She insisted they coordinate with Lord Tarly. In these letters, she spoke not as a distant monarch but as a fellow knight, urging restraint, compassion, and honor. When she sealed them with the new royal sigil, a crowned sapphire, the wax imprint felt as heavy as a stone in her hand. Months stretched into the better part of a year, and through relentless effort, Brienne's rule began to bear fruit. The roads grew safer, trade resumed between the once warring regions, and a sense of guarded optimism took hold among the populace. In that interim, Brienne oversaw the reconstruction of key septs, reaffirming the realm's faith, though she never used religion as a weapon. She invited the maesters of the citadel to advise her on matters of ravaged farmland and the potential for new forms of crops that might better withstand Westeros's shifting climate. She encouraged the children of small folk to learn basic letters and numbers, establishing the beginnings of a program that might, in time, lead to a more educated populace. Never before had a monarch so directly addressed such matters that had once been beneath royal notice. Many lords were perplexed, some resistant, some quietly impressed. The small folk, however, found themselves with a new reason to speak the queen's name in reverent tones. The day of her first royal progress arrived, marking a tour of several key regions of Westeros. She left the capital with a traveling court, including Tyrion and Samwell, aiming to hear the people's pleas in person. News of her approach preceded her, so when she arrived in towns from Rosby to Maidenpool, the streets were lined with onlookers. Her knights rode in formation, but they made no attempt to intimidate the crowds. Children gawked at the tall figure of their queen, older folk bowed or curtsied, and merchants quickly set up stalls in hope of a profitable day. Brienne would dismount in the town square, speak with local leaders, sample the local harvest, and listen to tales of woe or triumph as though each person's story mattered. Because, to her, it did. In Maidenpool, she recalled her days searching for Sansa Stark, how the town had seemed gray and unfriendly. Now, as queen, she found it had begun to rebuild. The harbor was busy with ships carrying goods. She met with Lord Mouton, who humbly offered her the hospitality of his keep. There, she partook in a simple feast, tasting fish stew seasoned with local herbs. She remembered how once the men of Maidenpool had mocked her mercilessly. Now they knelt in respect. The irony did not delight her, it only reminded her of how times had changed. She visited the local sept, knelt in silent prayer for the many souls lost to the wars, then emerged to greet a crowd of small folk who'd gathered. She realized that though her old wounds remained, she had grown into something larger, something that served a greater good. The taunts and cruelty of her youth had shaped her into this relentless guardian of the realm. Next, her progress took her north, though she did not go so far as Winterfell. She stopped in the Riverlands, near Riverrun, where Edmure Tully, somewhat diminished in influence, nevertheless welcomed the queen with respect. The region had been devastated by repeated wars, from the War of the Five Kings to the more recent Targaryen conflicts. Burnt fields and half-collapsed villages still dotted the landscape. Brienne ordered immediate funds for rebuilding, ensuring that local lords would distribute resources fairly among their people. She also spent a night in the open, camping by a wide stretch of river, listening to the murmur of the water under the moonlight. A few knights murmured that it wasn't proper for a queen to bed down without a castle roof over her head, but Brienne insisted. She wanted the people to see that their queen was not afraid to share in their hardships. She sat beside the campfire, her sword across her knees, and watched the starlight reflect on the water. She caught herself thinking of Podrick's gentle snoring, of the others sleeping near at hand, and realized that she finally had something akin to a family, the realm itself. An invitation arrived as she made her way south again. Sansa Stark wished an audience with Queen Brienne if Brienne would travel to Winterfell. It was a delicate request. Though they had once been intimately connected, Brienne as Sansa's sworn sword, now they stood as two heads of separate kingdoms. Did Sansa recognize Brienne's authority? The letter was warm but formal, praising Brienne's work and asking to reconnect. Brienne felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She remembered the vow she had made to Catelyn Stark, remembered how she had served Sansa through perilous times. She wanted to see her friend again, yet she understood that Sansa's position was complex. Duty called her to return to King's Landing, for pressing matters awaited. She penned a careful reply to Sansa, expressing her desire to visit the North at the earliest moment of convenience and reaffirming her respect for the North's sovereignty. For the time being, letters would have to suffice. She could not abandon the capital's needs indefinitely. She continued her journey south, completing her royal progress in Highgarden, which was still a shadow of its former glory. House Tyrell was gone, replaced by minor lords jockeying for power. She tried to spread stability and reason, urging cooperation in the fields that once fed half the realm. She left gold and instructions for new irrigation, hoping it might restore the once fertile gardens that gave the region its name. When at last she returned to King's Landing, the city had changed further. New houses were being built, the stench of the streets less overpowering, and more color shone in the banners fluttering above shops. The presence of the crown was not small or timid, nor was it brutal. It was simply watchful, invested, and fair as far as Brienne could manage. In the Red Keep, Tyrion presented a new plan for the city's governance. A city council composed not only of nobles but also of respected guild representatives. Samwell Tarly wholeheartedly endorsed it. Brienne, though at first hesitant, saw the value in giving skilled craftsmen and traders a voice, if only on local matters. She recognized it as a wise step. Fewer resentments, more investment in a shared future. In her second year as queen, the shape of her reign took clearer form. She discovered that her presence as monarch, while crucial, need not overshadow every aspect of people's lives. Rather, her greatest contribution was to uphold justice, to ensure that fairness and security flourished. Stories spread across the realm of her personal honor. How she had once escorted a young maiden to safety. How she had challenged a lord who sought to force marriage on an unwilling girl. How she had refused lavish tributes from the unscrupulous. The stories, though sometimes exaggerated, carried a kernel of truth. The queen's presence was felt not just in decrees or banners, but in a sense of moral grounding. It was never easy. The realm had known so much conflict that banditry and leftover feuds did not vanish overnight. Lannister loyalists in the Westerlands occasionally bristled at the crown's new direction, and the Ironborn teetered between loyalty and restlessness. Yet each time a crisis arose, Brienne responded with directness and a measured hand. She built alliances carefully, listening to wise counsel from Tyrion, Davos, and others. When a scuffle broke out in the Crownlands between two lesser lords, she summoned them to the Red Keep, heard their grievances, and dispensed justice impartially. Her decisions usually emphasized restitution over revenge, which confused some old-school nobles used to vendettas. But gradually they learned that this queen would not abide feuds that bled the land of its people and resources. For the most part, the people welcomed her approach. She might not have the flamboyant charisma of the Targaryens, nor the cunning of the Lannisters, nor the deep roots of the Starks, but she had a steadfastness that inspired confidence. In the streets and taverns, they spoke of Queen Brienne with cautious pride. Tales were told of her putting herself in harm's way to protect the vulnerable, of her tireless efforts to rebuild what had been destroyed. Her unusual path to the throne became a legend of sorts, a testament that perhaps the Seven Kingdoms had turned a corner. One crisp morning, as she oversaw sword practice in the courtyard, a raven arrived from Tarth. Brienne's heart lifted at the sight of the sigil on the message. It bore her father's seal. She had kept in touch with Lord Selwyn Tarth, but their correspondence was infrequent, her duties occupying so much of her time. The letter brought news of the Sapphire Isle's own progress. Fewer pirates haunted their shores now, and the local population was rebuilding after the war. Lord Selwyn expressed his pride in his daughter, remarking that never had Tarth stood so prominent in the realm's consciousness. Reading those words, Brienne felt a pang of emotion. Her father, who once had tried to make a lady of her in the traditional sense, now acknowledged the path she had forged. She remembered how uncertain she had been, how people had laughed at her, told her she would never fit in. Yet here she was, wearing a crown not for glory but for duty. She found solace, too, in routine moments. In the evenings, she sometimes would walk through the gardens, a simpler crown on her brow. She would watch the sunset reflect in the newly cleaned fountain, the water trickling over shaped stones. She would pause to offer a kind word to a passing servant or to compliment a young squire on his technique with the spear. She rarely smiled wide, but when she did, it was genuine, and those around her felt the warmth of it. Occasionally, she allowed herself a moment to think of Jaime Lannister, to wonder if he roamed the countryside in exile or if he had perished somewhere unknown. Tyrion never spoke of his brother, at least not to her, though she saw the sorrow in his eyes whenever he mentioned lost family. She had no illusions that her life might be shared with a lover or companion. It was enough for her to keep the realm safe. She had made her vow, and vows were not lightly broken. The third year of her reign brought new challenges. Whispers drifted in from across the narrow sea, speaking of war in Essos that could eventually spill into Westeros's trade routes. A few merchants arrived at court, requesting the crown's help in protecting their ships from pirates who had grown bolder. Brienne recognized that ignoring piracy would only lead to further trouble, so she ordered the royal fleet expanded, with Ser Davos at the helm of the project. She called upon the Ironborn to honor their agreement to help keep the seas safe, and Yara sent a terse reply affirming that no true Ironborn would tolerate competition from petty pirates. Thus, an uneasy but effective alliance at sea took root, pushing the threat back across the waves. Meanwhile, talk of the Queen's potential heir began to circulate. Courtiers and lords alike speculated on alliances through marriage. Brienne had not married, nor shown any interest in doing so, and that fact raised eyebrows. A realm needs an heir, they said. Tyrion, somewhat reluctantly, broached the subject with her in private. It was not a demand. He knew her feelings on the matter might be complicated, but it was a reality of kingship or queenship in Westeros. Brienne considered it, thought of duty and the lines of succession. She admitted she had no desire to wed for politics, no desire for children, simply to secure a throne she had never coveted to begin with. Yet, if the realm needed stability, if an heir was necessary to avoid a new power struggle after her death, she was prepared to do her duty. It was a stark conversation, tinged with sadness, for the notion of choosing a consort for purely political reasons clashed with the romantic ideal she had once harbored deep in her heart. Nonetheless, she did not rule it out, but set it aside for the future. There were more pressing matters at hand. One such matter arrived in the form of a sickness in the Crownlands, an outbreak of a fever that threatened to spread through the city. The Citadel sent healers, and Brienne mobilized resources to quarantine the afflicted, provide clean water, and burn refuse that might carry infection. She personally visited the makeshift hospitals, masked against the contagion, showing that she would not abandon her people in a time of plague. Her presence helped calm riots and quell rumors that the sickness was a punishment from the gods. She saw horrors. Children pale and trembling, parents weeping as they lost loved ones. But she refused to shrink from it. The fever eventually subsided, contained by the swift measures taken, and though it claimed many lives, it did not become the realm-wide catastrophe it could have been. This too, the people remembered, how their queen stood beside them in suffering, not above them. By now, talk that Brienne of Tarth was an illegitimate queen or a temporary placeholder had mostly died away. The great houses, worn down by war, had begun to appreciate that under this queen's reign, taxes were fairer, roads were safer, and the crown did not meddle in every local dispute unless absolutely necessary. The new face of monarchy was less about flamboyant power and more about consistent guardianship. Some found it dull. They missed the intrigue, the courtly dramas, the savage amusements that had once defined King's Landing. But most found they could live with a little dullness if it meant their lands were not burned, their crops not seized, and their children not conscripted into endless wars. One day, a traveler from the western hills came to court, an older woman named Rona who claimed she had lived through Tywin Lannister's campaigns decades ago as well as the more recent wars. She asked to speak to the queen. Brienne granted her an audience, kneeling slightly to hear the woman's trembling voice. Rona said that her entire life had been shaped by kings and queens who cared nothing for small folk. Her sons had died in one war or another, and she had no illusions about the highborn. Yet, she had come all this way to see if the tales were true, that there was now a queen who listened, who acted. She wept as she thanked Brienne for the changes that had finally brought her village some peace. No soldiers trampling fields, no outriders demanding harsh taxes. Brienne, moved beyond words, took the woman's hands and merely said that the realm belonged to its people and a ruler's duty is to keep them safe. Tyrion, watching from a discreet distance, blinked away moisture in his own eyes. By the time Brienne's 4th year of reign ended, she had effectively reshaped the monarchy's image. It was not a perfect realm, no places, but the scars of war were healing. During a rare quiet hour, she walked alone through the Red Keep's library, running her fingers across the spines of old chronicles detailing the horrors of past reigns, Aerys the Mad King, Robert's rebellion, Joffrey's cruelty, Cersei's manipulations, Daenerys's burning. She paused at an empty shelf, thinking that one day historians would pen a record of her rule. What would they say? That Brienne that just had held the realm together through honesty and steel? Or would they find fault in every compromise, every negotiation, every nuance of rule? It troubled her, for she wanted to be the protector the realm deserved, but knew she was only human. Still, she squared her shoulders, reminding herself that she could only move forward in good faith, trusting her instincts and the vows that defined her. Whispers from the north arrived again, suggesting that Sansa Stark, Queen in the North, was wrestling with her own unrest. Some northern houses were eager for closer ties to the Iron Throne, seeing prosperity in commerce and unity. Others clung fiercely to the idea of an independent North. Sansa herself was said to be cautious, wise, and determined to do what was best for her people. Eventually, the invitation to Winterfell came again, and this time, Brienne felt confident enough in the stability of the capital to make the journey. Tyrion and Davos would remain behind to handle immediate governance. She departed King's Landing in early spring, forging north with a retinue that included Podrick and her Queen's Guard. The further north they traveled, the cooler the air became, until at last they arrived at the gates of Winterfell under a gray sky that threatened snow. Sansa awaited her in the Great Hall, its banners proudly displaying the dire wolf of House Stark. The last time Brienne had been here, she was a simple knight, bowing to Sansa, offering fealty. Now she was a queen in her own right, yet she felt a warmth in her heart at seeing Sansa again. They embraced, briefly, formally at first, but then Sansa's eyes glistened and she whispered, "My lady, no, my queen. It's so good to see you." Brienne inclined her head, fighting the urge to correct her, to insist that she was only a knight fulfilling her vow. But times had changed. They were sisters in leadership now, each fighting to protect her people. The days at Winterfell were filled with discussions on trade routes, mutual defense pacts, and the potential for the North to rejoin the realm under certain terms. Sansa was cautious, explaining that the North valued its autonomy, having paid dearly for every inch of it. Brienne did not press. She laid out the benefits, stable routes for goods, aid in times of crisis, the intangible solidarity that came from unity, and assured Sansa that she would not forcibly claim dominion. Ultimately, they agreed upon a formal alliance that allowed the North to remain a separate entity but bound them in mutual defense. If any invader threatened Westeros, North or South, they would stand together. It was a compromise, one that both saw as a step forward. At a feast held in her honor, Brienne quietly toasted Sansa's wisdom and the hall rang with applause. Privately, the two women had a moment alone in the godwood. Snow drifted softly around them, clinging to the red leaves of the weirwood. Sansa turned to Brienne, her breath visible in the cold air, and asked, "Are you happy?" Brienne considered the question carefully, searching her own heart. She thought of the burdens of rule, the countless decisions, the weight of her crown, the lost dreams of a simpler life. But she also thought of the countless people saved from war, the children who grew up without fear, the farmland that flourished anew. At last, she answered, "I don't know if happiness is the right word. But I have purpose. That's enough for me." Sansa nodded as though she understood all too well. When Brienne departed Winterfell, the Northmen bowed to her as she rode away, though many kept their eyes on Sansa. It was a small courtesy that signaled mutual respect rather than subservience. Brienne accepted it with gratitude, acknowledging that in a land so vast and diverse, you could not force everyone to kneel through fear alone. Respect had to be earned. On her journey back south, she reflected on how far she had come from the naive, ridiculed girl on Tarth. No longer did she crave acceptance in the way she once had, she carried a different kind of acceptance now, one built from within, from the knowledge that she was doing the best she could. The seasons shifted, and in her 5th year on the throne, she received an unexpected visitor. Gendry Baratheon, the legitimized son of the late King Robert, arrived in King's Landing. He had spent time rebuilding Storm's End, focusing on forging alliances in the Stormlands and living up to the Baratheon name without repeating its violent mistakes. He entered the Red Keep in a modest manner, not demanding to see the Queen but requesting it politely. When Brienne granted him an audience, he appeared before her, clad in practical leathers and a cloak pinned with the Baratheon stag. He bowed low, addressing her formally as Your Grace, but with a warmth in his voice that suggested mutual respect. Gendry explained that the Stormlands had grown stronger again, partly thanks to the Crown's more lenient approach. But he also spoke of the old seeds of ambition that lingered there. Some Stormland lords whispered that Gendry should press a claim that the throne was rightly his by blood. He was weary of these whispers, of the constant need to prove he was not out for a crown. He came to pledge his loyalty, to ensure that no threat would arise from his domain. Brienne listened solemnly, recognizing the burden he carried. She extended her hand for him to clasp, saying simply that she believed him a man of honor and would trust him to keep the Stormlands faithful to the cause of peace. "If you ever feel the need for help," she added gently, "know that the crown stands behind you." Gendry's eyes showed a flash of relief. In that moment, Brienne realized how many across Westeros felt the weight of old loyalties, old claims. She was not alone in carrying a legacy she did not choose. Days rolled into months and the seasons progressed into the cusp of winter again. Brienne continued to rule with the same firm fairness, ensuring that any whiff of corruption was addressed. She ordered an overhaul of the city's tax system, making it more transparent and less prone to skimming by unscrupulous officers. She established a code of conduct for lords dealing with disputes among peasants under threat of crown intervention if they were ignored. She used the realm's coffers not on grand palaces but on restoring roads and building public granaries. All these measures endeared her to the common folk, though some highborn sneered at the notion of a queen concerning herself with such trivial matters. But Brienne ignored their sneers. She had seen too much suffering to let small folk be ground underfoot again. In the Red Keep, amid the tapestries now depicting Tartha's sapphire waters alongside the sigils of the realm, Queen Brienne often held open court. People of all stations could come, petition her directly, or simply see the face of justice in their land. Her presence was imposing, but her demeanor was measured. She would not abide disrespect, but neither would she dismiss an earnest plea. The line of petitioners could stretch long, and sometimes she lingered past dusk, hearing each one. Invariably, she walked away exhausted, her shoulders aching, but also buoyed by the feeling that she was making a difference. One afternoon, a messenger arrived bearing tidings from beyond the seas, a potential alliance with a free city, brazenly offering mutual trade benefits if the crown would lend ships for a distant conflict. Brienne refused to embroil Westeros in foreign wars for profit. She was not a conqueror, nor would she lend her ships to become mercenaries for a cause far removed from the realm's interests. It was a firm refusal, but she tempered it with an offer of open trade under neutral conditions. This decision, though lauded by commoners and many lords who had no desire for another war, ruffled the feathers of certain merchants who saw an opportunity for great wealth. Yet Brienne stood her ground. She reminded them that she was queen, not a sellsword. By her 6th year, travelers from distant regions spoke openly of the transformation in King's Landing. The city had not become a paradise overnight, but it was livable, organized, even quietly thriving. The crownlands were stable, and the peace treaties with Dorne, the North, and the Iron Islands held firm. Skirmishes still happened, but they were handled swiftly with minimal bloodshed. Some foreign dignitaries visited out of curiosity, wanting to see the tall warrior queen who had broken so many precedents. They found a court that was less ostentatious than those of past kings, a queen who would sooner discuss harvest yields than fine silks. This was not the grand Westeros of old, but it was not the broken one either. It was a realm in cautious recovery, quietly forging a future that might outlast the tragedies of the past. Now and again, Brienne found small pockets of time to remember that she was also a person, not just a queen. She visited her father on Tarth once, taking a brief respite from the chaos of court. The ocean waves sparkled around the Sapphire Isle, and Lord Selwyn greeted her with trembling pride. They walked along the shore, speaking of simpler days, though those days seemed a lifetime ago. She returned to King's Landing after a week, recharged if not exactly relaxed. She found that any illusions of normalcy vanished as soon as she resumed her seat on the throne, hearing petitions from dawn to dusk. Yet she clung to that memory of the sea's gentle roar, reminding her that somewhere in her soul she was still the young Brienne who loved the quiet majesty of water and sky. In her 7th year, a visitor from the Citadel arrived, a middle-aged archmaester with piercing eyes, come to study the realm's transformation under her reign. He asked pointed questions about her policies, her philosophy of rulership, her belief in knighthood's code. She answered carefully but truthfully, explaining that a vow to protect meant more than just swinging a sword against an enemy. It meant safeguarding prosperity, justice, and peace for the people. The archmaester departed, likely to write a chronicle on how the realm had reorganized itself after the devastation of the Targaryen Wars. Brienne did not yearn for glory in the pages of history, but she hoped that future rulers might learn from this era, might see that stability and honor could accomplish what fire and blood could not. At last, near the end of that 7th year, Brienne found herself gazing from the ramparts of the Red Keep at the city below. The sun was setting, painting the waters of Blackwater Bay in gold and crimson. In the distance, ships with the sigils of various houses glided in and out of the harbor, bearing goods and travelers. The city's skyline was broken by scaffolding as new towers rose, funded not by forced tributes but by trade and conscientious governance. Streets that had once been choked with fear were now merely busy with everyday life. She let out a slow breath, thinking of all that had been accomplished and all that remained to do. She knew she could not rest on her laurels. The realm's peace was still young, and any number of threats could arise from within or beyond the horizon. Yet the vision before her was a testament that even in Westeros, so prone to conflict, a different path was possible. She felt the cold weight of her crown, a circlet of steel that she had chosen for its plainness. It was a far cry from the golden or bejeweled crowns of past rulers. Nonetheless, it symbolized her office, her vow, her unceasing duty to do what was right. She thought back to the day of her coronation, to the stunned hush in the Great Council, to Tyrion placing that crown on her head. She remembered how foreign it had felt then. Over the years, it had come to feel less like a mark of power and more like a burden of responsibility that she accepted willingly. Perhaps that was the difference. She had never chased this crown. She had simply recognized that the realm needed someone to wear it with honesty. Below, she saw Podrick helping drill new recruits for the city watch, demonstrating correct posture for shield and spear. She saw merchants packing up their stalls for the day, laughing with one another, forging bonds of cooperation rather than suspicion. She saw children running barefoot, chasing each other between the market stalls, children who had never known the terrors of dragonfire or the endless toll of war. She allowed herself a rare, soft smile. This was not a realm of perfect joy, but it was a realm that might have a chance to flourish. It was her realm, hers to protect, hers to guide, for as long as the gods granted her life and strength. She turned away from the ramparts, made her way back inside the Red Keep. The corridors were quieter than they had been in years past, many courtiers having retired for the evening. As she passed a tall mirror, her reflection caught her eye. She saw a woman in her mid-years, tall and sturdy, clad in well-fitted armor, a steel circlet resting on hair that had begun to show the faintest streaks of silver. She saw scars that told of battles long fought, eyes that carried determination. She paused and looked at herself, recalling the awkward girl who once wept at cruel jests, who had believed she would never be more than a laughingstock. The memory felt distant, a reminder of a different life. When she stepped into the throne room, only a handful of torches illuminated the space. Shadows flickered across the black oak throne, the single sapphire at its apex catching the torchlight and glimmering. She approached it, running her fingers over the carved arms where so many times she had sat to dispense justice. She thought of all the monarchs who had come before, who had left legacies of war, betrayal, ruin, or triumph. She was determined that hers would be a legacy of healing and protection. For that, she needed no grand illusions, only the steeled resolve that had guided her all her life. Drawing in a breath, she settled onto the throne. Even the simple act of sitting there carried weight. She closed her eyes and let the silence envelop her. In the morning, the hustle of court would resume. She would hear new pleas, address new crises, push back against the darkness and the greed that occasionally reared its head. But for now, in the flickering light, she let herself feel the enormity of her journey. Ser Brienne of Tarth, the warrior who had once wandered Westeros on a hopeless quest, was now Queen Brienne, protector of the realm. She carried a sword and a crown, and in each moment of her rule she tried to embody the vows she had sworn. Yes, the realm had labored under the tyranny of bloodthirsty kings, the cunning of deceitful queens, the ambitions of the proud. Now it had a queen who was neither cunning nor deceitful, neither proud nor ruthless, only steadfast, only true. And in a land as wounded as Westeros, that was no small thing. If at times she doubted herself, she remembered that it was not her ambition but her honor that placed her here. And if the gods were good, that honor would guide Westeros into an age where justice and compassion were stronger than the swords that once tore it apart. She rested there, at the quiet heart of the realm, thinking not of her own wants, but of the myriad souls who depended on her. Their safety, their hope, their chance for a life without war, all rested on the decisions she made. It was a burden heavy as the plate armor she wore into battle, but she did not shrink from it. She was Brienne of Tarth, sworn knight, now queen. In the hush of that throne room, she silently reaffirmed her vow. "I will do what is right, as best I can," she murmured into the silence. The torch flames flickered as if in acknowledgement. Outside, the city glowed with lamplight, alive with the hum of peace and rebuilding. And though the specters of the past lingered in the corners of memory, the promise of a brighter dawn had taken root in the very stones of King's Landing. A dawn that Brienne, Queen of Westeros, had fought for and would continue to fight for with every beat of her loyal heart. Brienne rose from the throne in the quiet of early dawn, the last torch sputtering low against the walls of the Red Keep. She gathered her cloak around her broad shoulders, leaving behind the black oak seat that had become as much a part of her life as her sword. Outside, a grayish half-light crept across the sky, revealing a courtyard stirring with the earliest duties of the day. Scullions and messengers hurried, their murmurs subdued by the residual hush of the hour. Brienne moved with that tall, purposeful stride of hers through the winding corridors, meeting the nods of her queen's guard. By the time she stepped into the courtyard, the dull ring of steel from morning sword drills had begun to echo. She went directly to the training yard, where Podrick Payne was already leading a group of novices through basic spear forms. It warmed her to see how far Podrick had come. Once a shy boy with wide eyes, he had blossomed into a confident knight, though humility still shaped his every action. Seeing her approach, he saluted briskly. The novices craned their necks at the sight of the queen. She gave them a curt nod of greeting, then moved aside to a corner of the yard, where a rack of practice swords stood. Slipping off her cloak, she chose a wooden blade and began her own exercises. She moved slowly, each pivot of her body precise, controlling the weight of the practice sword as though it were an extension of her arm. The novices paused to watch. There was a hush whenever Brienne sparred. Her presence still carried that element of awe, for she was not a typical monarch who wore fine clothes and rarely touched steel. She was the one who had once survived the cruel anarchy of the War of the Five Kings, the one who'd fought with valor in the final conflict against Daenerys's armies, and the one who had, with no lust for power, ascended to rule them all. Even now, as queen, she would not let her body grow soft or her instincts dull. Her knights would follow her best if they knew she could stand shoulder to shoulder with them in battle. By the time she finished her morning drill, sunlight touched the towers of the Red Keep and the city beyond the walls stirred with a new day's life. Brienne found herself briefly breathless, her pulse thrumming. She replaced the practice sword, exhaled slowly, and felt that curious mix of satisfaction and somberness that always followed a good workout. It centered her, reminded her she was not just a ruler with parchment and quill, she was a knight who had fought for everything she believed in. She turned to Podrick, who was admonishing a novice on holding the spear too tightly, and gave him a small, approving nod. Then she left the yard to dress for court. Her armor had become her usual garb, albeit with a surcoat that bore the crown's sigil. She wore a steel circlet in her braided blonde hair, a simpler piece of regalia than the gaudy crowns of kings past. On her way to the throne room, she acknowledged the numerous petitioners already lining the corridors. Gendry Baratheon had arrived days ago to negotiate a new maritime route through Blackwater Bay. Lady Mariah Celtigar, a formidable matriarch from Claw Isle, was eager to present a fishing treaty. Farther behind them waited a modest group of merchants from the Reach, hoping to gain an audience and discuss shipping tolls. In the old days, such tasks might have been dismissed as beneath the king's notice, left to squabbling bureaucrats. But Brienne had made a vow to listen directly so the people understood their concerns mattered. The line of faces reflected exhaustion, eagerness, fear, and hope in equal measure. When she stepped into the throne room, the hush of sunrise had given way to bustling activity. A half-dozen attendants moved about, lighting the chandeliers or adjusting draperies to let in more light. Tyrion Lannister stood near the base of the dais, flipping through a stack of parchments with one hand, a quill in the other. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps and bowed in that quick, courteous way. "Your Grace," he said lightly, though there was genuine respect in his tone. "We have a full day. Are you prepared?" Brienne inclined her head. "I am," she answered. She never wasted words, especially on mornings like this when the tasks ahead were many and the hours too few. She ascended the steps and settled onto the black oak seat, her chosen throne. The single sapphire inset at its apex gleamed in the shifting light. It was a seat that symbolized not intimidation but duty. Facing the crowd gathering at the far end of the hall, she took a measured breath, recalling how strange it had once felt to preside over such an assembly. Now it was second nature, though she never stopped feeling the weight of it. With a quiet nod to Tyrion, she signaled for the first petitioner to approach. The morning wore on in a litany of petitions, complaints about taxes, requests for support in building new roads or harbor facilities, disputes over land boundaries. Brienne listened, always listened, letting the petitioners speak without interruption. Then she asked terse questions, cutting to the core of each matter. On hearing both sides, she made decisions or offered compromises. She wasn't infallible, no ruler ever was, but she gave each matter the attention it deserved, trusting her sense of right and wrong rather than the old custom of deferring to whichever lord had the most power. If it meant a lesser noble got justice against a larger house, so be it. The room occasionally fell silent when she delivered a ruling that upended centuries of tradition, but she had learned that fairness often meant bucking convention. At midday, they paused for a brief meal, fresh bread, boiled eggs, small ale. Brienne ate quickly at a side table while Tyrion updated her on the realm's finances. The treasury was stable thanks to careful taxation and the reopening of trade with Essos, even if the alliances there were tentative. Ser Davos, the master of ships, sent word that new war galleys were nearly complete at the Blackwater Bay shipyards, ensuring that pirates would have a harder time preying upon Westerosi vessels. Although Brienne disliked the idea of building a more imposing navy, she understood the necessity. Peace was fragile, and the seas had grown restless with the rumors of fresh conflicts across the narrow sea. She swallowed her last bite of bread, thanked Tyrion, and rose to conclude the final hours of court before the daily session ended. Late in the afternoon, the time came for Gendry Baratheon to present his petition. He approached with that same straightforward honesty that Brienne admired. Dressed in a plain leather jerkin bearing the Baratheon sigil, he bowed, though not so low as to scrape the floor. Respectful, but not servile. He explained that Storm's End was seeing a resurgence of shipping. The cove near the castle had become too small to accommodate the larger merchant vessels now plying the southern coasts. Gendry requested permission to expand the harbor and a reduction in certain port fees to encourage trade from Essos. In return, he offered a promise: if the realm needed more ships for its naval endeavors, the Stormlands would help finance them, forging them in local shipyards rather than relying solely on the Crownlands. Brienne listened, impressed. She recognized in Gendry the unspoken desire to better the Stormlands, to do right by the Baratheon name without indulging in the thirst for power that had gripped many of his kin. "Your offer seems just," she said at length, her clear voice carrying through the throne room. "But if the crown reduces those fees, we must ensure the new harbor remains open to ships from all corners, not just those with Stormland ties. Will you pledge that Storm's End will never tax or block the vessels of rival houses?" Gendry nodded, looking her in the eye without flinching. "I will, Your Grace. The Stormlands stand to benefit from open trade just as much as the realm. This isn't a chance for me to hoard influence, it's a chance to rebuild." Brienne believed him. She glanced at Tyrion, who raised an eyebrow in mild approval. "Then it shall be done," she decreed. "We will issue a new royal mandate reducing the fees for vessels anchoring in the new harbor. In turn, the Stormlands will commit to building additional galleys for the royal fleet, which shall patrol our coasts to ensure safety for all." She shifted her gaze back to Gendry. "You will oversee these constructions personally?" "Yes, Your Grace," he said, relief and pride mingling in his tone. Then, in a lower voice, he added, "I'm grateful for your trust. There are many who, well, they look at me and still see the son of a blacksmith, despite the Baratheon name. They see a bastard with a flimsy legitimization. But I want to earn my place and Storm's End's place in this new Westeros." Brienne's expression softened with understanding. She recalled her own early days, mocked for her appearance and her refusal to conform. "You've already earned it," she said, "by the sweat of your brow and the honor in your deeds." With that, Gendry bowed and took his leave. As he departed, Brienne noticed the hush among the courtiers. She felt a pang of gratitude that men like Gendry were part of her realm. Ambitious, yes, but in a good way, driven to improve the lives of his people rather than to claim more power for himself. She prayed that such cooperative spirits would continue to rise in Westeros, healing the deep scars of past wars. The day's court ended soon after, and Brienne released the gathered lords, merchants, and ambassadors. Many bustled out, eager for wine and rest, or for sly conversations in corridors. Brienne stepped down from the throne, escorted by her queen's guard. Tyrion approached with his usual measured step. "Well done," he remarked. "Soon we'll be building so many ships that we might rival the Ironborn for mastery of the sea." Brienne managed a faint smile. "Let's hope we don't need all of them for war." "Hope, indeed," Tyrion replied softly. They continued walking, the crowd parting for them. "On another matter, Archmaester Pellin from the Citadel has arrived, bearing more scrolls about the Targaryen lineage. He claims new evidence has come to light that might complicate a certain dormant claim. Shall we meet with him on the morrow? Or is that something you'd prefer to delegate to Samwell?" Brienne's brow furrowed. "I'll see him personally. The realm has had enough pretenders and rumored lineages. If there's even a whisper of a Targaryen resurgence, I want to know." "As you wish," said Tyrion, making a small note on a scrap of parchment. "I'll summon him for a private audience in the Solar. We don't want to stir gossip if it's all speculation." Brienne nodded, glad for Tyrion's thoroughness, yet inwardly weary at the thought of yet another Targaryen rumor. The realm had only recently begun to truly put that name behind it. She hoped that this so-called discovery would prove inconsequential. She parted ways with Tyrion, climbing the stairs to her private chambers for a moment of respite before the evening meal. Her suite overlooked the city, a vantage point she had come to cherish. When she stepped onto the balcony, The sweep of King's Landing stretched before her. Bathed in the orange-gold hue of sunset, the rooftops glimmered with a sense of renewal. She remembered the day she had arrived in this city so many years ago, how it had seemed a lair of corruption and danger. Now it was starting to feel like a place that could harbor hope, if properly guided. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. Images flickered through her mind. Images of the wars, the flames, the relentless swirl of chaos that had once threatened to consume them all. Somehow she stood here now, alive and holding the realm together. She recalled the promise she had made to Catelyn Stark, the vow she had carried through every dark night, to protect the innocent, to uphold honor. In ruling, she merely extended that vow to an entire land. There were days she wondered if she had the stamina to continue, but she had come too far to yield now. When night fully fell, she went below to a small dining hall reserved for her and her close advisors. Tyrion was there, along with Ser Davos, Podrick, and Samwell Tarly, who was in King's Landing again to serve as a guide in the complicated interplay of ravens, libraries, and legal documents. They ate a modest supper: roasted fowl, a hearty stew of barley and carrots, and a small cask of wine. Conversation flowed between the men, covering local gossip and the realm's broader affairs. Brienne listened more than she spoke, occasionally offering a dry remark or a word of gratitude. It felt good to be among people she trusted, people who had proven themselves over and over. As the meal wound down, Samwell produced a thick tome, placing it carefully on the table. "I found something that might interest you, Your Grace," he said, flipping open the pages. "It's a record of the unsung knights who served in the final days of King Tommen's reign, men and women who were overshadowed by the chaos that followed. One was a certain Ser Jace of Felwood, known for saving entire villages from bandits. But the record's so obscure it barely mentions him. I thought it might be a parallel to your own service, how you once served so quietly, overshadowed by larger conflicts." Brienne regarded the open page where lines of faded script recounted a single paragraph about this Ser Jace. "He sounds honorable," she said softly, skimming the text. "I'm sorry he never received recognition." Samwell nodded. "Indeed. Sometimes the best among us remain in the shadows. But that's precisely why the realm needs those who recognize such deeds and preserve them." She reached out and gently closed the tome, her gauntlet hand surprisingly careful on the old parchment. "Thank you for sharing this with me." They talked a while longer, though the hour grew late. At last, Brienne excused herself. She passed through torchlit corridors to her bedchamber, two of her Queen's Guard trailing at a respectful distance. Inside, the chamber was simple by royal standards: a large bed draped in linens dyed Tarth blue, a desk piled with parchments, and a single tapestry depicting the seven-pointed star. She set aside her armor piece by piece, feeling relief as the weight lifted from her shoulders. Sitting at her desk, she lit a smaller lamp and began to review the day's notes. So many trifles required her signature: supply orders, heraldic clarifications, minor disputes. She worked through them methodically, her eyes occasionally drifting shut. A soft knock sounded at the door. She rose, crossing the room with a slight frown. One of her guards stood there, helmet tucked under his arm. "Pardon, Your Grace," he said, head bowed. "A raven's arrived from the north, marked urgent." Her heart quickened at the mention of the north. "Sansa." She gestured for him to hand it over. Breaking the seal, a direwolf's head in gray wax, she unrolled the parchment, scanning Sansa's neat script by lamplight. The message was terse but clear. Tensions had spiked near the neck. Skirmishes with roving Sellsword companies had left bodies near Moat Cailin. Winterfell was safe, but Sansa feared these mercenaries might encroach deeper into northern territory, or worse, slip southward. Sansa asked if the crown had any knowledge of Sellsword movements or of lords hiring them in secret. Brienne's frown deepened. Sellsword companies rarely operated in the north unless driven by coin. Someone had to be funding them, but who? She set the parchment down, thinking. The realm was large, and 1,000 petty intrigues still lurked in its corners, waiting to blossom into violence. With a steadying breath, she called the guard back. "Send for Ser Davos," she instructed. "I need to know if any ships bearing foreign Sellswords have put into White Harbor or Eastwatch. And have Maester Samwell check the city records for references to Sellsword arrivals in the Crownlands." "Yes, Your Grace," the guard murmured, and departed swiftly. Alone again, Brienne read the letter a second time. She felt the old stirring of worry. Sansa had declared the North a separate kingdom, but they were bound by alliance, by ties of friendship. The last thing Brienne wanted was for Sansa to face a secret invasion. But the letter was measured, not desperate. Knowing Sansa, she could handle much on her own. Still, Brienne would do all she could to aid her. She penned a reply, assuring Sansa she would investigate. Signing it with her personal seal, she prepared to send it at first light. Whatever was happening at the Neck, it would not be ignored. That night, sleep came fitfully. Dreams of old battles haunted her, visions of the dead littering fields from the War of the Five Kings, faces contorted in agony. She saw the red keep in flames, dragons shrieking overhead. Then she dreamed of that day she was knighted by Jaime Lannister, the hush of the campfire, the warmth in his eyes, the sword tapping her shoulder. Waking in the gray pre-dawn, she sat up, chest tight, remembering the ghosts of that time. She rose, dressed, and steeled herself for another day of ruling. She met Ser Davos in her solar before the formal court session began. He rubbed his stubbled chin and sighed. "We've heard little of Sellsword companies docking in the Crownlands, Your Grace. But that doesn't mean they haven't landed elsewhere. The Stepstones are riddled with pirates, smugglers. A large group of mercenaries could easily make port in secret. Dorne's coasts are also less monitored than we'd like." Brienne nodded, pacing along the polished floor. "We must find out who's paying them. If they're marauding near the Neck, they might be trying to sow discord between the north and the southern realms." She paused, turning to him. "Davos, can I trust you to send discreet ravens to the Lords of the Vale and the Riverlands, inquiring whether they've encountered or heard rumors of these Sellswords?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "I'll see to it immediately." She thanked him, then prepared herself to meet Archmaester Pelin. He waited in the Solar's antechamber, an older man in austere robes, the chain around his neck gleaming with a variety of metals. When Brienne invited him inside, he bowed with a reverence that looked practiced, almost theatrical. She gestured for him to sit, taking a seat across a wide table. Tyrion entered a moment later, standing at Brienne's right shoulder like a watchful shadow. Pelin cleared his throat. "Your Grace, thank you for granting me this private audience. My mission here is simple, to present newly uncovered documentation regarding a bloodline we believed extinct. There is a notion, a rumor, if you will, that a child of Daenerys Targaryen survived. We at the Citadel have done our utmost to verify or refute this claim." Brienne's back tensed. She had expected some mention of Targaryen lineage, but not a child of Daenerys. She remembered how Daenerys had arrived in Westeros, full of fire and vengeance, how everything had unraveled so swiftly. "You believe she bore a child before her death?" "It is not proven," Pelin admitted, opening a worn leather satchel and withdrawing a bundle of scrolls. "However, our inquiries in Essos have unearthed peculiar references, midwives in Volantis claiming they treated a pregnant woman with silver-gold hair, accompanied by Dothraki warriors, some months after Queen Daenerys first arrived on Dragonstone. The woman purportedly vanished, leaving no trace. It could be fabrication, or it could be real. If it is real, Your Grace, this child would be of Targaryen blood, possibly recognized by certain factions eager to restore the old dynasty." Brienne measured her response. She glanced at Tyrion, whose expression had gone grim. "What do you propose I do with this information?" she asked the Archmaester. Pelin spread his hands. "The Citadel's duty is to preserve knowledge and pass it on to those who must act. If the rumor proves true, there may be hidden supporters, secret cells that might rally around such a claimant, whether or not the child truly is Daenerys's offspring. We simply caution the crown to be vigilant. A Targaryen child, real or fabricated, could ignite fresh turmoil." She nodded slowly. "We appreciate the Citadel's diligence. I have no desire to see Westeros torn by another war of succession." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "Should you learn anything further, you will inform us immediately." "Understood." "Of course, Your Grace." Pelin bowed once more, then carefully packed up his scrolls. He rose to depart, but lingered a moment. "I might add, I see in your rule an example that many will try to undermine. The Targaryen mystique is powerful, but so is the power of honest governance. If this rumored LD does exist, your fairness might stand as the best shield against those who would place a Targaryen on the throne again." When he was gone, Brienne blew out a quiet breath. Tyrion studied her face, speaking softly. You don't believe these rumors, do you? She pursed her lips. I can't dismiss them outright. We both know the realm's capacity for secrets. Daenerys was rumored barren, but that might have been false. Or the entire rumor could be a hoax, a ploy by exiled supporters to sow fear. Either way, we can't let it distract us from more tangible threats, like the Sellswords in the north. Tyrion nodded, tapping his fingers on the edge of the table. Agreed. We keep our eyes open. We listen for whispers. But we don't let shadows rule our decisions. A rueful smirk touched his lips. I've had enough Targaryen drama to last a lifetime. That same day, Brienne oversaw the dispatch of scouts to the north, men loyal and discreet, instructed to gather any evidence of Sellsword movements. She also wrote to Sansa again, indicating the realm's readiness to assist with troops if necessary. Meanwhile, her everyday responsibilities marched on, a scheduled meeting with the Master of Coin about trade revenues, an inspection of new recruits for the Queen's Guard, a visit to the city's granaries to ensure adequate supplies for the approaching winter. It seemed unending, yet she did not falter, finding strength in the knowledge that each action built a safer realm. Days melted into weeks, and winter's chill became more pronounced. Snow did not often fall on King's Landing, but the winds carried a biting cold down from the north. Messengers arrived with updates on the Sellsword sightings. Many had conflicting accounts. Some insisted the mercenaries had left the Neck entirely, others claimed they had sacked a small village near the Fever River. The truth was elusive, but there was enough evidence to suggest multiple groups of Sellswords were roaming, possibly bound by no single overlord but rather a loose network of unscrupulous men. Gendry Baratheon departed for Storm's End, promising to hasten construction on the new harbor. The Ironborn sent a terse note that the seas remained free of large mercenary movements, though Yara Greyjoy added a characteristically curt warning, if Sellswords come by sea, we'll send them to the bottom. Dorne remained quiet, Prince Kyle exchanging the occasional letter with the crown, but showing no sign of aggression. It was as though Westeros stood on a precarious ledge, bracing for a storm that might or might not come. In the midst of this tension, an unexpected visitor arrived at court, an envoy from Essos representing a powerful Sellsword company known as the Company of the Sphinx. Their spokesman, a tall, gaunt man named Hessario, wore embroidered silks and carried himself with a certain confidence that bordered on arrogance. In the throne room, he swept into a low bow, presenting a golden medallion etched with the likeness of a stylized sphinx. Brienne regarded him with a guarded expression. Tyrion stood at her side, arms folded, watching closely. We have come, Your Grace, Hessario said in a voice smooth as oiled cloth, to offer our services in protecting your realm from other unscrupulous Sellsword companies. We are well known in Essos, famed for our discipline and loyalty to the highest bidder. A thin smile. The highest bidder, of course, could be the Iron Throne. Brienne let a moment pass before answering. Westeros does not make a habit of employing foreign Sellswords to fight their own kind. We have our own knights, our own loyal soldiers. Hessario's dark eyes glinted. Yet your kingdom is vast and your foes might be cunning. The presence of skilled mercenaries in the Neck suggests infiltration. Why not hire the Company of the Sphinx to flush them out? We are skilled at rooting out rival Sellsword bands. Brienne kept her tone level. At what cost? His smile widened, revealing unnaturally white teeth. Our usual terms are not cheap, Your Grace. We would require a retainer of gold dragons and certain trade privileges once the threat is eliminated. Tyrion interjected, and what assurance do we have that once you're here, you won't simply join forces with the very Sellswords we want gone, if that benefits you more? Hessario's laugh was as soft as silk. We have a reputation to uphold. In Essos, a reputable Sellsword company thrives on trust. If we betray an employer, we lose all credibility. The Company of the Sphinx has endured for 2 centuries by honoring its contracts. Brienne studied the man's face, searching for any flicker of deceit. The tension in the hall grew as the courtiers watched. Inwardly, she found the notion unsettling. Inviting more foreign swords into Westeros might create more problems than it solved. Yet she also recognized that the Sellswords plaguing the Neck had proven elusive. The Crown's own forces might struggle to pin them down without incurring heavier losses. Still, she had reservations. We will consider your offer, she said at last, her voice echoing. But do not presume our decision will come swiftly. Your men will remain outside the city if they have traveled with you. You are free to lodge at a local inn under the watch of our guards while we deliberate. Hessario's bow was flourish enough to make a mummer proud. As you wish, my queen. We await your summons. With that, he departed the throne room, his polished boots clicking on the stone floor. When he was gone, Tyrion whispered, we should watch him carefully. Men like that are as slippery as eels. Brienne rose from the throne. Agreed. I have no intention of hiring sellswords. But if Hessario has come to us, others might come too. Something is stirring in Essos and we'd be fools not to stay alert. The following days brought more rumors, some of them contradictory. A handful of lords in the Riverlands reported sightings of a pale-haired woman traveling with a small retinue near the Blackwater Rush. No one could confirm her identity, but gossip flared. Could it be another Targaryen pretender? Brienne pressed her scouts for details, but none were conclusive. It might have been a foreign noble or just a local woman with dyed hair. The realm was rife with speculation, and that alone could be dangerous. Fear of a hidden Targaryen child might drive uncertain lords to rash alliances or stoke old hatreds. Brienne strove to keep the realm steady. She held firm in her daily governance, ensuring that essential tasks were not overshadowed by rumor. Supply lines needed oversight, winter threatened the north, and newly built roads in the Crownlands offered hope for trade. She convened with her council often, Tyrion for overall strategy, Davos for naval intelligence, Samwell for scholarly insights, and a handful of wise lords who had proven their loyalty. Their consensus was to remain cautious, gather more information, and avoid hasty military actions that might provoke more chaos. Yet trouble found its way to King's Landing in a more immediate form, a string of murders in the city's underbelly. The victims were minor crown officials, tax collectors, trade inspectors, each found slain in grim fashion, their bodies left in alleys or the backrooms of taverns. The city watch was baffled, suspecting a coordinated effort to undermine the crown's authority. Panic rippled among the bureaucrats who feared stepping into the streets. Brienne visited the scenes herself, accompanied by the commander of the city watch, an aging man named Sergrance, and 2 of her Queen's Guard. She walked through narrow lanes where the stench of waste mingled with cooking fires. At one site, she knelt beside a dark stain on the cobblestones where a tax collector had died. Witnesses spoke of masked figures, quick strikes, no loot taken. The purpose was not robbery, only murder. It seemed an organized campaign to spread fear. Brienne's joy tightened. She refused to let terror grip her city. She immediately ordered the watch to double patrols in the most vulnerable districts. She also decreed that no crown official would walk alone after dusk. Meanwhile, Tyrion strategized how best to lure the killers into a trap, suspecting they were financed by some faction opposed to Brienne's reforms. The murders fanned an undercurrent of anxiety. Foreign sellswords in the neck, rumors of a Targaryen child, masked killers in the capital, too many threats converged at once. Still, Brienne would not be paralyzed by fear. She summoned the leading merchants and guild masters, reassuring them of the crown's resolve. She met with the city watch daily, pushing them to root out criminals with careful diligence, not brute force that might ignite the city's resentment. Her presence in the streets, walking them in daylight hours, always flanked by loyal knights, rekindled a sense of security among many. Mothers would step to doorways to see the queen pass, nodding respectfully, reminding each other that this was the queen who had once walked these very byways in simpler armor, risking her life to protect others. At length, the city watch caught a break. They intercepted a masked man fleeing the scene of an attempted murder. Overpowered by watchmen, the man was dragged to a secure cell. Under interrogation, he confessed to being part of a small group hired by an unknown patron who paid in gold coins stamped with a strange sigil, a serpent coiled around a staff, not a common Westerosi design. The masked man claimed not to know the patron's identity, only that messages were exchanged through a series of intermediaries. Brienne and Tyrion examined one of these coins in the Red Keep, turning it over under the lamplight. Essos Mint, Tyrion guessed, brow furrowed. Or from one of the free cities. I don't recognize the symbol. Brienne set the coin down. It's no known Westerosi house. If this patron is from Essos, they might be connected to these rumored sellsword movements, or the Targaryen rumor, or both. She looked to Tyrion. We must find the link. Tyrion tapped his fingers again, a habit that revealed his anxious mind. We have Hessario in the city. He may or may not be involved. Let's invite him to a meeting. If he recognizes this coin or the sigil, we might glean more. She agreed, summoning Hessario at sunset. He arrived with 2 of his sellsword companions, both standing tall in matching cloaks embroidered with the Sphinx emblem. Brienne, flanked by her Queen's Guard, led them into a small audience chamber. Tyrion was there, along with Samwell, who took notes quietly. On a table waited the strange coin. Hessario studied it with mild interest. Exquisite craftsmanship, he murmured. Do you recognize the sigil? Brienne asked, her gaze piercing. Hessario lifted the coin closer to his eyes. A serpent coiled around a staff. It reminds me of certain heraldry used in Volantis, or perhaps Lys. There are cults and secret societies in Essos that bear serpents as their mark. Some dabble in, shall we say, shadowy dealings. Others revolve around religious devotions. He set the coin down with a click. I cannot say precisely. I only know that serpentine imagery is favored by a handful of lesser-known groups who specialize in clandestine work. Tyrion narrowed his eyes. Clandestine work like assassination? Hasario shrugged. There are always rumors. The painted serpents of Lys, the hooded priests of Volantis, many claim to sell their services as killers or spy masters. Gold can buy anything at Essos, including poison and blades. Brienne's jaw tightened at the confirmation that Essosi interests might be behind the murders. If you had to guess, who would have the means and motive to target my officials here in King's Landing? And hire sellswords in the neck. A hint of a cunning smile tugged at Hasario's mouth. Perhaps someone who sees your rule as a threat to their ambitions. You have created stability in Westeros, a market that thrives on your reforms. That might not please certain groups in Essos who profit from chaos. Or perhaps there are Targaryen loyalists among the eastern cities, dreaming of a restoration. If they believe a rumored Targaryen child exists, they might sow discord here to pave the way for an invasion. Brienne exchanged a look with Tyrion. Hasario's words struck too close to the rumors swirling about. She pressed further, but Hasario only repeated that the company of the Sphinx was neutral, offering to help for the right price. With no conclusive answers, the meeting ended. Brienne dismissed Hasario with instructions not to leave the city without informing the crown. When he was gone, Samwell ventured he could be telling the truth. Essos is a vast land of factions. Any one of them might have reason to meddle here. Tyrion paced. I can't shake the sense we're missing a central piece. The sellswords, the murders, the rumor of Daenerys's child. Perhaps all roads lead to one cunning patron who wants to destabilize your rule before a new claimant appears. If so, we need solid evidence before we act. Brienne folded her arms. Sansa's trouble in the neck might be the spark. If these sellswords push deeper into the north or provoke the Riverlands, we could have open conflict. That might be the moment these conspirators reveal a Targaryen pretender claiming to be a savior. We'd have to fight a war on multiple fronts. Ser Davos arrived late to the discussion, fresh from the docks. A new trade ship from Lys docked this morning, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. The crew claims to know nothing of sellsword movements, but I did overhear talk of a powerful Lysene noble rumored to be traveling incognito in Westeros. No name given, only that he's wealthy and single-minded about re-establishing Targaryen rule. Brienne took a steadying breath. We can't keep the city in lockdown. Nor can we ignore these leads. She thought of all the progress they had made: roads, trade, peace. To see it unraveled by a cunning plot was unthinkable. We'll increase vigilance, gather more intelligence from the free cities, and prepare to send a larger contingent north if Sansa needs it. We won't let them fracture this realm again. In the midst of these machinations, life in King's Landing went on. The city streets remained busy, the markets alive with hawkers and haggling. Construction on the outer walls neared completion, offering better defenses than the city had enjoyed in decades. Though the murders of crown officials continued sporadically, the watch had grown more effective, catching or driving off many of the masked killers. Brienne made sure their families were cared for, awarding pensions from the royal treasury, a gesture that bolstered morale. Her consistent displays of compassion for the victims' loved ones reassured the populace that this queen did not turn a blind eye to suffering. She also tended to her personal vow of sparring each morning, stepping into the yard with Podrick and other knights. On one such morning, as the sky glowed pink with dawn, she found herself crossing swords with a new recruit to the Queen's Guard, a sharp-eyed woman from the Westerlands named Saralina. They traded blows in a swift dance of steel, Brienne's heavier style matched by Alina's agile footwork. Sparks flew with each clang of metal. Finally, they broke apart, each breathing hard. Brienne felt a flicker of pride at how far the notion of a woman knight had come, once scorned, now accepted. She lowered her blade and nodded in respect. Alina bowed. Around them, a ring of watchers cheered, enthralled by the skill on display. For a moment, Brienne felt the simple joy of a knight's life, unencumbered by the burdens of the crown. But duty called again, and she retreated to the Red Keep, sweaty and awake, ready for the day's challenges. On this particular morning, a raven from Winterfell awaited, bearing news. The sellsword threat near the neck had intensified. Skirmishes had flared around Moat Cailin, but the North's forces, led by Sansa's bannermen, had repelled the attackers. Still, Sansa warned there were too many of them, scattered in smaller bands, striking unpredictably. Worse, a rumor spread among the northern small folk that these sellswords were financed by the crown itself, that Queen Brienne sought to undermine northern independence. A lie, no doubt, but a dangerous one. Rumors could corrode alliances faster than steel swords. Brienne's frustration mounted. She dictated a swift reply to Sansa refuting the slander and restating her willingness to send an armed host north. Then she turned to her council. "Someone wants to drive a wedge between me and the north," she said, pacing around the table. "We must demonstrate solidarity with Sansa." Tyrion nodded. "Perhaps a royal progress to Winterfell. Show the north that you and Sansa stand united." Davos stroked his beard thoughtfully. "That would mean leaving King's Landing vulnerable if something else happens. Yet a personal visit might calm tensions more than 1,000 letters ever could." Brienne weighed the risks. "I haven't visited the north since my last trip, nearly 2 years past. Sansa invited me again, but I postponed given the demands here. It may be time to go." She turned to Tyrion. "You would remain here as my hand. Keep watch on Hessario and these possible Targaryen loyalists. Ser Davos, I'd like you to accompany me with a small retinue, just enough knights to keep us safe on the road." Tyrion bowed his head. "It shall be done, your grace. But be cautious. If this is all a grand scheme, you could be walking into a trap." Her jaw set. "I won't let fear keep me from doing what's right. If the conspirators hope to isolate the north, they'll fail." Within a week, preparations were complete. Brienne appointed Tyrion as regent in her absence with the backing of Samwell for counsel. She handpicked a small guard, Sarah Leaner, Podrick, and a dozen more skilled knights who had proven both loyal and honorable. They would travel overland, passing through the riverlands and the Neck, avoiding lavish processions that might stir unrest. Brienne believed that traveling plainly would keep them close to the people, showing she had nothing to hide. On a crisp morning, they departed King's Landing. The city's gates yawned open, letting them through in a modest column of horses and wagons. The people came to see them off, many bowing or calling well wishes. Brienne rode at the head, wearing a cloak of deep blue, her sword at her side, the steel circlet in her braided hair. She felt a mixture of resolve and trepidation. Behind her, the Red Keep's towers faded from view. Their journey began smoothly enough. The roads northward were in fair condition, thanks to the reconstruction efforts of recent years. They passed farmland dotted with autumn-browned fields, the harvest already gathered. Nights were spent in local inns or the keeps of lesser lords who greeted the queen with graciousness and, in some cases, barely concealed surprise at how few guards she traveled with. Brienne insisted on paying for supplies rather than demanding tribute, further reinforcing her reputation as a just ruler. After a week's ride, they reached the Riverlands. The fields here bore deeper scars from past wars, though they had recovered remarkably under Brienne's policies. Lord Edmure Tully still presided over Riverrun, and though his authority had waned over the years, his courtesy had not. He welcomed Brienne's party with open arms, hosting a modest feast. During dinner, he spoke of rumor upon rumor, roving bandits in the northern edges of the Trident, talk of sellswords crossing the Green Fork. Brienne listened gravely. By morning, she was more convinced than ever that the Sellswar threat was no exaggeration. Continuing onward, they approached the Twins where the great crossing over the Green Fork stood. In the days of House Frye, passing here had been fraught with tension. Now, the Twins was overseen by a distant branch of the Tullys who had inherited it after the Freys fell from grace. The crossing was not without its toll, but the atmosphere was less hostile than it had once been. Brienne paid the toll without complaint, mindful that each house must maintain their lands. Sarah Leaner, riding beside her, murmured that the archers atop the Twins' ramparts looked uneasy, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Brienne stayed alert, but their crossing proved uneventful. Beyond the Twins lay the Neck, a swampy region prone to mists and hidden dangers. Here, the air grew heavier, the ground softer. The tall grasses and peat bogs stretched in every direction, broken by meandering causeways. This land was the ancient domain of House Reed, loyal bannermen to the Starks. If sellswords roamed these watery expanses, they would be hard to track. Brienne's party advanced cautiously. Marsh flies buzzed around their horses, the knights wore hoods and scarves against the biting insects. Podrick wrinkled his nose, muttering that he missed the fresh breezes of Tarth. Brienne let a faint smile touch her lips, remembering the sapphire waters of her home. They encountered the first sign of trouble at a half-sunken village where the causeway branched west. Abandoned huts stood in disarray with not a soul to be seen. Carefully dismounting, Brienne and Sarah Leaner investigated. The huts had been ransacked, muddy footprints everywhere, signs of a struggle. She found dried blood on a threshold, but no bodies. A hush fell over the travelers as they realized the villagers had likely fled or been taken. The only clue was a torn piece of dark cloth near the edge of the mire, marked with that same serpent sigil from the coins in King's Landing. Brienne held the scrap in her gauntlet hand, feeling anger flare in her chest. They pressed onward, each knight scanning the horizon. The mist thickened, swirling around the horses' legs. Knights in the neck were even more perilous. Brienne set strict rotations for watch duty, keeping the camp ringed with a circle of flickering torches. Once, in the middle of the night, Podrick swore he heard muffled splashes nearby as though someone crept through the bog. But no enemy emerged. By dawn, the swirling fog had swallowed any track or trail that might have been left behind. Finally, they emerged onto firmer ground near Moat Cailin, its ancient towers rising like broken teeth from the swamp. Sansa's bannermen had established a small garrison there, and they greeted Brienne with subdued relief. One of the northern officers, Ser Halia Malin, stoic and bearded, ushered them inside what remained of the fortress walls. There, Brienne at last received a full picture. Multiple bands of sellswords, each operating in small, mobile groups, attacking settlements, taking what they could, and vanishing into the bogs. The northern forces had repelled them time and again, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. "We suspect someone is coordinating them," Ser Halia explained, pointing to a crude map pinned to a wooden board. "They strike in different areas, but never overlap. It's like they have separate tasks, each carefully orchestrated." Brienne studied the map, marking the pattern of attacks. "Have you any captives?" Halia shook his head. "They either flee or fight to the death. We've taken only a few wounded stragglers and they refused to speak. Some had foreign tattoos, marks from Essos. Not a single Westerosi among them." That confirmed Brienne's suspicion. These sellswords were imported, not local brigands. And likely expensive. Her mind reeled at the cost. Someone with deep coffers paid these men to wreak havoc. She exhaled, turning to Sarah Lena and Podrick. "We'll ride on to Winterfell tomorrow to consult with Queen Sansa. Then we'll coordinate a plan to sweep the neck properly. These attacks must end." That evening she wrote another raven to Tyrion, detailing her findings. Though she worried about King's Landing in her absence, she knew Tyrion was more than capable. She also sent a letter to Sansa informing her that Brienne would reach Winterfell shortly. The warmth of Moat Cailin's meager fires gave little comfort. The fortress was mostly ruins, walls crumbling from centuries of neglect, but it remained the gateway to the north. The next day, they left the swamps behind, climbing the gradual slopes toward the northern plains. The weather grew colder, the wind sharper. By the time they sighted the distant walls of Winterfell, a swirl of light snow drifted around them. It had been years since Brienne last set eyes on the castle that had come to symbolize Stark resilience. Smoke rose from its chimneys and the gatehouse loomed tall. A horn sounded, echoing in the crisp air. Sansa met them in the courtyard, her red hair braided into a simple coronet, her posture regal beneath a thick cloak of grey wool. The look on her face was one of equal relief and worry. She approached Brienne with measured steps and Brienne dismounted to greet her. In a gesture that transcended politics, they clasped hands briefly, Sansa's gloved fingers tightening around Brienne's. "Welcome, Your Grace," Sansa said softly, though her eyes reflected the warmth of old loyalty. "I wish the circumstances were kinder." Brienne dipped her head. "It's good to see you safe, my queen." The formality was a nod to Sansa's sovereignty in the north. Then she added, more quietly, "I came as soon as I could." Sansa's eyes gleamed. She turned to the assembled knights. "All of you are welcome here. Come inside, out of the cold." She paused, scanning the courtyard. "Where's Ser Jaime? Is he not with you?" The question hit Brienne like a sudden chill. She felt that old ache in her chest, remembering the man who had once fought beside her. Jaime Lannister's fate remained unknown. He had vanished in the wreckage of King's Landing years ago. Some claimed he had perished in the final battle. Others whispered that he roamed the realm as a hermit or that he had sailed across the sea. Brienne had found no trace. She inhaled slowly. "I have no word of Ser Jaime, my lady." A flicker of sorrow crossed Sansa's face. Then she pressed her lips together, gesturing for them to follow. "Let us speak inside. I have hot mulled wine, and I suspect we have much to discuss." The great hall of Winterfell enveloped them in its rustic warmth. Braziers glowed with orange coals and the walls bore tapestries of the Stark direwolf. Servants brought steaming bowls of stew and loaves of thick bread. Once the travelers had eaten their fill, Sansa convened a smaller council in a side chamber off the hall. There, seated around a long table, they traded updates on the sellsword threat. Lady Brianna Manderley was present, representing House Manderley of White Harbor. Lord Glover had also arrived, offering his perspective from Deepwood Motte. Each report painted the same picture. These foreign mercenaries raided the edges of the north, especially near the swamps where it was easiest to evade pursuit. People whispered that Queen Brienne's reign had brought them in, a baseless rumor stoked by unknown agents. Sansa's voice trembled with anger when she recounted how some villages had begun to question the old loyalty to House Stark, fearing that the north was under the thumb of a foreign queen. Brienne, listening intently, felt a rush of guilt. Though she had never sought to control the north, her presence as queen in the south might always cast a shadow. She laid her gloved hands flat on the table. I will not allow these lies to stand. My rule is built on honesty. Whoever is behind these rumors seeks to divide us. Sansa nodded. I know that in my heart. But hearts can be swayed by fear. If we don't stop these words and the rumors, they'll only grow bolder. They discussed a joint operation, sending a combined force of northern and royal knights into the neck, systematically clearing out word strongholds. Sansa agreed to command some of her bannermen while Brienne contributed her own knights from the crownlands. The operation would be risky, but if successful it would shut down the immediate threat and prove that the north and the crown were allied in purpose. As they solidified plans, Sansa cast Brienne a knowing look. You know the neck well from your travels before. Brienne remembered her long search for the Stark girls years ago, trudging through these very bogs, guided by uncertain leads. She inclined her head. I do. We'll use that knowledge to our advantage. Night fell on Winterfell, the torches and braziers flickering in the corridors. Brienne wandered the castle's courtyard, feeling a hush descend. She came upon the Godwood, its ancient weirwood standing silent in the snow-laden hush. A single torch lit the path, revealing the red leaves that stood out starkly against the white drifts. She remembered her vow to Catelyn Stark in the same Godwood, so many years past, how she had promised to protect Sansa and Arya. She had failed to save Catelyn, but she had kept her vow to the daughters in time. Now, the vow extended to preserving the north itself. She stepped into the quiet space. Snow crunched under her boots. Her breath formed pale clouds. For a moment, she closed her eyes, feeling the presence of the old gods alien to her Tarth upbringing, yet strangely comforting. She whispered a prayer, not to any particular deity but to the memory of those who had fallen, to the land itself that needed peace. Then she turned and saw Sansa standing at the edge of the clearing, hands clasped before her. I wondered if I'd find you here, Sansa said softly, stepping closer. You always had a respect for this place. Brienne inclined her head. It has a gravity to it. They stood in silence for a time, the snow drifting around them. Finally Sansa spoke again, her voice wavering with an emotion that Brienne couldn't quite read. I'm so grateful you came. So much weighs on us, and it seems the ghosts of the past never truly fade. Brienne understood that feeling all too well. She exhaled, seeing her breath swirl. We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future. Sansa's gaze flicked to the weirwood's carved face, its red sap weeping like tears. I just hope we can stop whoever's behind this before more people die. Brienne placed a hand gently on Sansa's arm, a rare gesture of warmth. We will. The next days were consumed by planning. Brienne split her men into small groups alongside northern guides who knew the marshes. They would coordinate with outriders from House Reed who were experts in swamp warfare. Meanwhile, Winterfell would remain guarded by Sansa's loyal knights, ensuring that no words used the Queen's absence as an opening. Sansa insisted on sending her cousin Ryan Stark, a capable commander, to oversee one wing of the operation. It would be a test not only of martial skill but of trust. If these joint forces succeeded, the rumors about the crown deliberately attacking the north might be dispelled. On a frosty morning, Brienne readied her horse in Winterfell's courtyard. Her knights donned cloaks and helms, finalizing their gear. Sansa stood on the castle steps, a swirl of snow catching in her hair. Good fortune to you, she said, and there was a catch in her voice as she addressed them. Show these words the might of a united north and south. Brienne bowed from the saddle. We will, my lady. With that, they rode out, following the winding road back toward the boggy expanse of the neck. They made for a hidden outpost near Greywater Watch, rumored to be a key vantage point. True to the rumors, it was not easy to locate. House Reed scouts met them in the murky gloom of a half-submerged causeway, leading them through twisting paths that seemed to shift underfoot. At last, they reached a small clearing of drier ground where they could camp. That night, Brienne conferred with the Reeds, who had been tracking the words. Lord Howland Reed, a reclusive figure, did not appear in person, but his children and loyal men relayed his knowledge. They pinpointed a cluster of mercenaries camped some miles away. The plan was to strike at dawn, catching them unaware. Brienne found little sleep amid the damp and the insect hum, her mind fixed on the coming battle. She had fought in plenty of skirmishes, but leading a combined force in these swamps felt fraught with hidden perils. Before first light, she rose, buckled on her armor, and led her knights forward. The reeds guided them silently, knee-deep at times in muddy water, weaving through tall grasses and bog pools. A chill wind rustled the reeds. Clouds blotted out the stars. They neared the mercenary encampment undetected. Brienne spied flickers of torchlight through the mist, the silhouettes of tents. Her heart pounded. With a silent signal, she urged her force to spread out, flanking the camp. Then, with a bellow that cut the gloom, she led the charge, crashing through the outer perimeter. The Sellswords reeled, half-dressed and startled from sleep. Swords clashed, the bog churned beneath trampling feet, and torches fell, scattering embers across wet ground. Brienne's blade flashed in the torchlight, parrying a wild slash from a mercenary who wore an Associ style of armor, banded leather dyed with serpentine motifs. She pressed in, knocking him off balance with her shield, then delivering a swift strike to his side. Around her, the combined forces of the North and the Crown roared, pushing the Sellswords into disarray. Podrick fought nearby, skillfully dispatching an opponent who lunged with a short spear. Reed archers loosed arrows from the swamp's edge, each shot guided by flickers of torchlight. Shouts and screams filled the air. The Sellswords fought back fiercely, but Brienne could sense they were uncoordinated, perhaps unused to the bogs. Despite the chaos, one band of them tried to regroup near a cluster of fallen logs, rallying around a tall figure barking orders in a foreign tongue. Determined to prevent them from forming a defensive line, Brienne charged forward, water splashing around her greaves. She slammed her shield into the nearest mercenary, forced him back, and locked eyes with the commander, a scarred Associ warrior who glared at her with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He roared an order, and 3 men rushed her simultaneously. In the swirl of battle, Brienne's training asserted itself. She pivoted, slicing one attacker across the chest, spinning to block a second strike. The third nearly landed a blow on her flank, but Podrick intervened, deflecting the blade and plunging his own sword into the man's gut. The tall commander snarled, lunging with a curved saber. Brienne met him head-on, their blades ringing out. He was quick, landing a shallow cut on her arm. She hissed at the pain, but her focus never wavered. With a powerful riposte, she struck his blade aside and drove her sword into his chest. He staggered, eyes bulging, then collapsed with a gurgling breath. The camp was in disarray. Northern soldiers clashed with smaller pockets of resistance, while the Sellswords shouted frantic orders. More than a few attempted to flee, melting into the surrounding mists, but Reed's scouts were waiting to pick off the stragglers. After a harrowing quarter hour, the bulk of the mercenaries lay dead or dying, with some scattering into the night. The combined force of North and South had prevailed, though at a cost. Several men lay wounded or worse. Breath steaming in the chill air, Brienne ordered the knights to secure any who surrendered. A handful had thrown down their weapons, cowering near a partially collapsed tent. She took stock of her own side. Podrick sported a cut to his thigh but stood upright. Sarah Leaner was helping a wounded northern soldier, blood staining her gauntlets. Once she was sure the area was secure, Brienne wiped her sword on a scrap of cloth and turned to examine the dead commander. He wore no identifying insignia beyond the serpentine motifs on his armor, but a pouch at his belt bore the same coin they had found in King's Landing. Podrick limped over. "Looks like we found one nest of them, Your Grace." "Only one nest," she echoed, looking out into the swirling mist. "There could be more, but this is a start." From the corner of her eye, she saw a cluster of northern soldiers dragging a wounded Sellsword toward her. The man had a bloody gash on his side, but he was conscious, eyes flicking around in a mix of terror and defiance. One of the Northmen growled, "We caught this one sneaking off. We want to see if he'll talk." Brienne stepped forward, fixing the mercenary with a hard stare. "You've lost this battle. There's no point in staying silent. Who do you serve?" Who paid you to come here? He spat blood, trembling. I serve gold. He hissed in a thick accent. We were told to harass the north no more. They said it would spread fear, that it would stir distrust of the southern queen. Who gave you these orders? She demanded. Was it someone in Essos? A Targaryen loyalist? The man gave a bitter laugh, wincing at the pain in his side. No names. Only saw envoys with black hoods. We'd get new coin each time we raided a village. Didn't ask questions. Brienne frowned. Where do you meet these envoys? Is there a base? A camp? He shrugged, coughing. They come to us, always in the swamps, then vanish. We take the gold, do what they say. He let out a ragged breath. Kill me if you want. I've no more to say. Tension lined Brienne's face. She signaled the soldiers to carry the man away for medical treatment. She wasn't in the habit of executing prisoners who might yield further leads later. Still, his cryptic words confirmed that a shadowy network orchestrated these raids. Someone wanted to pin the blame on her or at least to sow suspicion between the North and the Crown. They spent the rest of the morning clearing the camp, tending to wounded, and collecting any useful information. Most of the sellswords had little of value, just foreign coin, battered weapons, and half-rotted provisions. But the scale of the operation was evident in their numbers. This was no idle band of raiders. As the sun finally burned through the morning mist, the battlefield emerged in stark relief. Bodies sprawled in the muddy ground, tattered tents, pools of dirty water stained with blood. Brienne felt a weariness deepen in her bones. The realm's peace was precious, yet so easily shattered by men with coin and ambition. That night, they buried their dead in a small rise above the swamp, marking each grave with a simple cairn. Brienne helped lift stones, despite the urging of her knights that she should rest. She wanted to honor those who had fallen, north and south alike, in this messy fight to preserve the realm. She recalled the many graves she had dug through the years, friends and strangers, each lost to the unrelenting cycle of war and vengeance. She vowed anew that she would bring the puppet masters behind these sellswords to justice. In the dimming light, Podrick approached, leaning slightly on a makeshift crutch for his injured leg. You should rest, Your Grace, he said gently. We still have more work ahead. She wiped sweat from her brow, nodding. You're right, but I needed to finish this first. Podrick's eyes flicked to the fresh cairns. You've done more for them than many lords would. Perhaps, she murmured, but it never feels like enough. They withdrew to the camp, W.H. Ere the northern soldiers built a watchful perimeter. Over a sparse meal, Brienne conferred with Saralina and the Reed scouts about their next move. More sellsword camps might be hidden in the deeper swamps or even encroaching on the riverlands. She decided to press on, rooting them out in any direction they fled. Messages were sent back to Winterfell and King's Landing, reporting their partial victory. Though the fight was far from over, morale had lifted slightly. They had proven that a united force could shatter at least one group of mercenaries. Over the next several days, they scoured the neck, launching surprise raids on smaller pockets of sellswords discovered by Reed scouts. Some surrendered immediately, hearing what had befallen their main camp. Others fought to the death. Bit by bit, the mercenary presence dwindled. Brienne watched as the illusions of their well-coordinated threat fell apart without a central commander. Still, each new captive had little information about their shadowy patrons. Finally, the snow-deepening clouds overhead signaled the approach of a harsher winter, prompting Brienne to call a halt. We've scattered them, she told her assembled men, her voice resonating in the chilly air. Any that remain are too few to threaten the north openly. We'll return to Winterfell, gather our wounded, and then I must head back to King's Landing. Tyrion needs to hear what we've learned. Riding back toward Winterfell, Brienne felt both relief and unease. They had dealt a blow to the sellsword menace, but the question of who financed them remained unanswered. If anything, the success of this campaign might push their enemy to attempt more cunning strategies. She refused to let that possibility paralyze her. Better to push forward, strengthen alliances, and remain ever vigilant. Sansa awaited them in Winterfell's courtyard once more, though this time her expression held a glimmer of cautious hope. After hearing Brienne's report, she invited her to dine privately in a smaller hall away from the bustle of lords and knights. There, over a meal of roast venison and winter vegetables, they spoke as two rulers bound by respect. This should silence the rumor that you sent these cells words, Sansa said, sipping mulled wine. Word will spread quickly that you personally helped drive them out. Brienne nodded. I hope so. But a single rumor can fester if left unchecked. I would ask that you continue to counter it at every turn. Of course, Sansa replied, then offered a small smile. And I'll share your bravery in leading the charge. You've done more than most would. Brienne set her cup down. We do what we must. I only wish I knew for certain who pulled the strings. Whoever they are, they have resources across the narrow sea. She hesitated. Sansa, if a Targaryen pretender emerges, do you believe the North would remain independent or join my cause to repel such a threat? Sansa's gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat old uncertainty stirred. Then she drew a breath. The North remembers who burned it, who left scars. A Targaryen would find no welcome here. Even so, the North's independence is precious to my people. If a true threat arises, one that endangers us all, I will not stand by idly. We may be two kingdoms, but we can still be one people against a common foe. Brienne nodded, relief mingling with gratitude. That's all I can ask. They parted on good terms. By the next morning, Brienne's party was ready to depart Winterfell once more, this time bound for King's Landing. Sansa and a handful of northern lords gathered in the yard to see them off. The chill air bit at Brienne's face as she swung into her saddle. She took a moment to meet Sansa's eye, offering a genuine if subtle smile. Thank you for your hospitality. Sansa inclined her head. Safe travels, Queen Brienne. May the gods watch over you. They rode out under the gray sky, a hush clinging to the frosty roads. The journey south seemed quicker, though still fraught with icy winds and patches of snow. Brienne's mind spun with all she would relay to Tyrion, the partial victory in the neck, the ongoing mystery of the hidden patron, the possibility that Targaryen loyalists in Essos might be involved. She also worried about King's Landing. Had the murders continued? Had Hessario from the company of the Sphinx made any new moves? Their return trip brought them again through the Riverlands. This time a messenger met them halfway, riding hard from the capital. He wore the sigil of the hand of the queen and carried a sealed scroll. Brienne took it and read under the pale winter sun, her eyes narrowing as she scanned Tyrion's neat handwriting. The contents alarmed her. Tyrion had uncovered evidence linking Hessario to clandestine meetings with a Lysene noble in the city. Further, attempts on the lives of crown officials had not fully ceased. One more bureaucrat had been found murdered, another missing. Tensions were rising again. Some claimed the queen had abandoned the capital in its time of need. Anger simmered beneath Brienne's calm surface. She folded the letter, pressing her lips into a thin line. We must ride harder, she told her knights. King's Landing needs us. And so they did. Their pace quickened, horses pushed to longer days, shorter rests. The wind scoured their faces, but they kept going. At last, the spires of King's Landing came into view under a wintry sky streaked with a watery sun. The city's walls looked much as she'd left them, strong, well-guarded, but attention seemed to cling to the air. People on the roads parted to let them pass, many craning their heads to catch sight of the queen returned. Brienne nodded briefly to them, not pausing to greet anyone until she was through the gates. Riding up the winding streets to the Red Keep, she noticed more guards than usual, the city watch posted at tight intervals. A hush fell in the courtyard as she dismounted. Tyrion hurried out to meet her, cloak flapping in the chill wind, a worried crease on his brow. Your Grace, he greeted, bowing. I'm glad you're back safely. We have much to discuss. Take me to the Solar, Brienne said, hooking her helm under one arm. I want to hear everything. They walked inside, passing corridors lit by torches that seemed dimmer than usual. Once in the Solar, Tyrion closed the door, leaning against it wearily. Hessario left the city a week ago, claiming he was heading for Pentos. But I have reason to believe he's still in Westeros. He may be involved in the murders. Several watchers reported sightings of men wearing the Sphinx sigil in the alleys near the last victim's home. Brienne set her helm down on a table, fixing Tyrion with a grim stare. Did you arrest them? They vanished, he said with frustration. And as for the Lysene noble, we've yet to confirm his identity. Whispers say he travels under various aliases. Some suggest he's tied to the painted serpents of Lys, those cultish assassins Hessario mentioned. Blast it, Brienne muttered under her breath. So they continue to operate in shadows. We discovered more serpent coins in the neck, tied to the cell's words. So the pattern fits. Essosi involvement, stirring chaos from north to south. Tyrion nodded. It gets worse. Another rumor is circulating that a Targaryen heir will soon reveal themselves at Dragonstone. I don't have proof, but the tension in the city is palpable. Old supporters of House Targaryen, those who kept quiet under your rule, are stirring again, encouraged by these rumors. She clenched her fists, recalling Archmaester Pellin's warning. Then our enemy is close to unveiling their ultimate ploy. We have to be ready. If a pretender does surface, they'll likely claim the throne through the Targaryen name. Tyrion exhaled. And if enough lords fear you can't protect them from foreign assassins and sells words, they might be tempted to shift allegiances. We must show strength and justice. Brienne stepped to the window, gazing over the city's rooftops. Winter's pall fell over King's Landing, the sky a leaden gray. Smoke curled from thousands of chimneys, a testament to the crowded lives within the walls. She saw the faint glimmer of Blackwater Bay in the distance, dotted with ships. So many lives rested on her decisions. Order the city watch to conduct a thorough sweep for Hesario's men. We'll place a bounty on Hesario himself, dead or alive. And we'll comb the harbor for any sign of this Lysine noble. If he's still in the city, we'll drag him into the light. Tyrion dipped his head. As you command. We'll move quickly. She turned back, eyes resolute. And we prepare for the possibility of a Targaryen pretender. We cannot strike at shadows, but we can ensure that any sudden claimant is met with facts. The realm must see that we rule fairly without tyranny. We can also gather loyal houses to reaffirm their support. Perhaps call a council if it comes to that. Tyrion's features relaxed somewhat, as though heartened by her clarity. We'll do all we can. I'm with you, Brienne. He glanced around to ensure their privacy, then spoke gently. You look exhausted. You've ridden long and fought hard in the neck. Take some rest tonight. We'll begin in earnest tomorrow. She allowed herself a moment to feel the ache in her muscles, the weariness in her spirit. But she squared her shoulders. I'll rest when I can, but not before I check on the families of the latest victims. I won't allow them to think I've forsaken them. And so, late in the day, she donned a simpler cloak and, with a small guard, ventured into the city's lower wards. Snow fluttered in the air, melting on cobblestones that still radiated the faint warmth of a southern climate. At a modest dwelling, she met the grieving widow of a trade inspector who had been stabbed in an alley. Brienne knelt to offer condolences. Though the widow trembled at the sight of the queen, she soon broke into sobs, speaking of her husband's gentle ways and how proud he was to serve the crown. Brienne placed a small purse of gold in her hands, ensuring her immediate needs would be met. Then she promised that justice would be done. Night fell by the time Brienne returned to the Red Keep. The corridor torches flickered as she trudged to her chambers, her breath coming in weary sighs. She removed her armor with deliberate slowness, piece by piece, hearing the echo of steel in the quiet space. Her reflection in the polished metal of her breastplate showed the lines of fatigue on her face. She thought of how far she had come, from a knight fighting for a cause she barely understood to a queen grappling with shadows and conspiracies that stretched across the sea. Yet her vow remained the same: protect the innocent, maintain honor. She sank onto the edge of her bed. For a moment, she allowed her mind to drift, remembering simpler times, though they were not truly simple, her earliest days training with a sword on Tarth, the first time she met the Starks, the uncertain bond she forged with Jaime. All stepping stones to this moment. She reminded herself that she could never go back. The future demanded her strength. If the realm was to remain at peace, she would have to stand firm against these hidden threats. At dawn, she rose, summoned fresh resolve, and began the relentless work of a queen determined to thwart the darkest schemes. She convened her council, handing down orders for a citywide search. Notices were posted, informants quietly paid, ships inspected in the harbor. Ser Davos took charge of investigating foreign vessels. Samwell scoured the libraries for any reference to the painted serpents or the serpent staff sigil. Tyrion coordinated with the city watch to intensify patrols. Even the rumor of a Targaryen child was addressed. Brienne arranged for discreet envoys to sail to Dragonstone, prepared to greet or confront any would-be pretender. Yet days went by with no sign of Hesario or the Lysine noble. The painted serpents, if indeed they were behind the murders, slipped through the city's labyrinthine alleys. Rumors continued to swirl. Some claimed the Targaryen heir would arrive with an army of Unsullied at the next full moon, others insisted dragons had been seen off the coast. The city grew restless, the people caught in a tide of speculation that spilled into taverns and marketplaces. Brienne refused to let panic reign. She ventured into the streets often, speaking calm words to the crowds, reminding them that the watch kept order. One bitter evening, a rider from the Stormlands arrived with a sealed message for Brienne's eyes only. She recognized Gendry's hand at once. Breaking the wax, she read that Storm's End had recently played host to a foreign lord from Lys who claimed to be a traveling scholar. After departing, rumors of bribed stewards and secret nighttime meetings emerged. Gendry suspected the man's name was Corrado, almost certainly an alias, and that he might be the very Lysine noble stirring trouble. Gendry apologized for not realizing sooner but promised to come to King's Landing with more information. Brienne clenched the parchment. So Corrado, presumably the painted serpent conspirator, had traveled from Storm's End to King's Landing. The net was tightening. She pressed her council to double their efforts. Tyrion tapped the coin with the serpent sigil on the table. We must set a deliberate snare, he proposed. Announce something that would flush him into the open, a false rumor to lure him out. Brienne considered it. What if we spread word that I'm planning a sudden journey overseas to meet with the Iron Bank or some such? That might tempt him to move against me directly or fear losing his chance. Tyrion's eyes glinted. Yes, we stage your departure. In reality, we keep you safely in the Red Keep while a lookalike or a lesser official leaves in a royal carriage. Corrado might attempt an attack or show his hand. Meanwhile, we close in. She nodded. It's risky. But these assassins have targeted my officials, not me personally. Perhaps they aim to undermine me more than kill me. But if they believe they can strike me or manipulate my absence, they might act. They enacted the plan swiftly. Rumors spread that the Queen was departing for Bravos on urgent financial matters. A lavish carriage was prepared to leave at dawn, accompanied by a small guard. In truth, Brienne remained hidden within the Red Keep, her armor replaced by unassuming clothing, prepared to move at a moment's notice. Tyrion, Ser Davos, and the City Watch prepared an elaborate watch around the carriage route. Samwell oversaw ravens ready to be sent if Corrado or Hesserio struck. That morning, the gates opened to let the carriage rumble out into the fresh fallen snow. A crowd gathered to watch, believing the Queen was off on royal business. A handful of suspicious figures loitered at corners, eyes tracking the carriage. Undercover watchmen tailed them. But nothing happened at first. The carriage rolled on, passing through several wards without incident. Then, just as it neared the city's outskirts, a commotion erupted. 3 masked riders emerged from an alley, crossbows in hand. They fired at the carriage while others tried to block the guard's path. The watchers sprang into action. Crossbow bolts clattered off the carriage's side. The guard stormed forward, swords drawn. A fierce melee ensued, the masked riders fighting with desperate ferocity. One of them yelled in accented common tongue for the true blood of the dragon. In the tower above the city gate, Tyrion and Brienne watched through arrow slits. The plan was working. The ambush had been triggered. Brienne donned her helm, heart-pounding. Let's move, she told Tyrion. We can't let them escape. She led a contingent of knights racing down the steps, out onto the street behind the masked riders, cutting off their escape. Steel clashed, and the watchers who had disguised themselves as commoners rushed into the fray. The ambushers realized too late they'd fallen into a trap. One tried to flee on horseback, but the city watch shot his mount from under him. 2 were struck down. The third, cornered, raised his crossbow in trembling hands, scanning for a route out. He aimed at a knight but found Brienne stepping into view, sword raised. He snarled, "You can't stop what's coming, usurper." Then he fired, the bolt flying. Brienne twisted aside with practiced reflexes, the bolt slicing past her shoulder guard. She lunged and disarmed him with a blow that sent the crossbow skittering across the cobblestones. He tumbled backward. Knights closed in, restraining him. Panting, Brienne surveyed the scene. The carriage was intact, no casualties among her guard. Tyrion emerged, flanked by watchmen, looking relieved. "We have one alive," she said, pointing to the captive. "He might lead us to Corrado." They questioned him fiercely. At first, he spat in their faces, cursing in Lysine. But after being separated from his fallen companions and threatened with immediate execution, he yielded. Pale and shaking, he claimed Corrado was indeed a Lysine noble with ties to a secret society dedicated to restoring a Targaryen monarchy in Westeros. They believed a child of Daenerys survived. The painted serpents were behind the assassinations, paying local thugs and foreign killers to disrupt the Queen's regime until the heir was ready to appear. He said Corrado was likely hiding in the city still, waiting to confirm the Queen's departure. "Where in the city?" Brienne demanded, voice cold as steel. The man swallowed hard. I don't know. He changes safe houses. But he keeps close to the harbor district, near the old Lysine merchant warehouses." That was enough. Brienne and Tyrion sprang into action, leading a swift strike force to the harbor. Snow whirled in gusts as they fanned out among the warehouses, checking each one, confronting suspicious dock workers. At last, they cornered a group of foreign men in a derelict storehouse. A pitched battle broke out, swords clanging on crates, men shouting in multiple languages. Brienne, at the forefront, spotted a slender figure darting upstairs. "Corrado?" She barked at Podrick to follow while she cut her way through 2 henchmen. Tyrion coordinated the knights below. On the storehouse's second level, Corrado had knocked over barrels to block pursuit. Podrick scrambled over them while Brienne climbed a broken ladder. She glimpsed a cloak of fine lysine silk swirling out of sight behind a corner. There was a flicker of panic in her as she realized Corrado might slip away through a window or hidden passage. Summoning her strength, she shoved aside the barrels, ignoring the sting of splinters in her palms. They pursued him to a cramped loft where broken rafters formed a precarious walkway above the main floor. Corrado turned, dark hair framing an aristocratic face marked with fear and anger. "You," he hissed, voice laced with a lysine accent. "The so-called queen. You should have sailed away." Brienne advanced, sword at the ready. "You orchestrated murders in my city," financed Sel's words in the neck, all to pave the way for a Targaryen pretender. "Surrender." His lips twisted in a sneer. "A rightful heir. Daenerys's child. The realm will burn for its injustices and from the ashes." Brienne had heard enough. She lunged, driving him back against a wooden support beam. He drew a slender stiletto, slashing wildly. Podrick came up from behind, pinning Corrado's arm. Corrado thrashed, nearly toppling them all off the narrow walkway. The building groaned under their weight. Snow flurried in through broken roof tiles, swirling in a bizarre dance around them. Finally, Brienne gripped Corrado's wrist and twisted until he dropped, the stiletto letting it clatter below. She shoved him against the beam and pressed the edge of her sword to his throat. Corrado gasped, eyes wild. "You can't kill me," he rasped. "The child is real. His supporters are everywhere. You kill me, you martyr me." Brienne's voice was ice. "Where is this supposed child? Who is raising him?" He glared, refusing to speak. Podrick forced his other arm behind his back. The hiss of Corrado's breath was the only sound. Below, the clang of steel subsided as the city watch overcame the last of Corrado's men. The storehouse fell silent except for the crackle of a small fire caused by an overturned lantern. "Take him," Brienne said softly to Podrick, stepping back. "Bind him. He'll face justice. And maybe the dungeons will loosen his tongue." Corrado spat blood on the floor, but did not resist further. They let him down, precarious step by precarious step, into the arms of waiting knights. Tyrion looked up from restraining another conspirator, relief flooding his features at the sight of Brienne safe. "We've captured a few alive," he panted. "I assume Corrado is among them?" Brienne nodded. "He is." He spoke of a Targaryen child, nothing more. "We'll make him talk." With Corrado's capture, the Painted Serpent operation in King's Landing collapsed overnight. City Watch raids uncovered hidden caches of serpent coin, forged documents intended to slander the Queen, and more horrifyingly, a list of high-ranking targets that included not only the Queen's officials but also prominent lords from the Westerlands and Reach. The plan, it seemed, was to systematically destabilize the realm. Under interrogation, Corrado offered only scattered hints of the rumored Targaryen child, vague references to Volantis and a secret temple, but no concrete evidence. He seemed to relish the idea that he still held secrets, goading them. Yet the conspirators' network in Westeros had been largely broken. Brienne ordered Corrado locked in a high-security cell, guarded by knights personally loyal to her. She refused to execute him out of hand, wanting to glean more about any other agents scattered across the land. But in the weeks that followed, he revealed little more. The city, at least, breathed easier with his group dismantled. The murders ceased, though the rumors of a Targaryen heir persisted. With each passing day, though fewer believed them, the realm had faced this boogeyman before. Now they saw it for what it was. A cunning ploy orchestrated by foreign interests. Still, Brienne was not complacent. The troubles in the Neck had been contained but not fully resolved. The possibility of a real Targaryen child, however slim, could not be discounted. She continued to correspond with Archmaester Pelin, pressing him to track any new developments in Essos. Tyrion dispatched his own network of informants to Volantis and Lys, offering gold for verifiable facts. Davos bolstered the navy, ensuring any future invasion by foreign Sel's words would meet a formidable blockade. In the months that followed, winter took a firmer hold on the land. Snow-dusted King's Landing in a rare display, blanketing rooftops and turning the streets slippery. Yet commerce continued, the city stable enough that merchants adapted to the season. Brienne's presence was felt everywhere, from the granaries that distributed extra rations to the poor to the watchtowers that guarded the gates. She never forgot the vow she had made upon taking the throne, to protect the realm, to rule fairly, to keep the peace. Corrado's conspiracy had been her greatest challenge yet, but it had not broken her. In fact, it had solidified her alliances. Sansa stood firmly with her, Gendry Baratheon proved loyal, and many saw her swift response to the threat as a testament to her strength. When word finally came from Essos that the rumored Targaryen child was either an absolute fabrication or a heavily guarded secret that might never surface, Brienne allowed herself a measure of relief. She knew she must remain vigilant, for the legacy of dragons never fully died in the hearts of some. Yet for now, the painted serpents had been scattered, their Lysine puppet master rotting in a cell, his shadow minions disbanded. The cell's words in the neck had been crushed, the rumors of her complicity silenced. The city's morale improved and the realm seemed to stabilize once more. On a crisp morning at the onset of spring, Brienne stood atop the walls of the Red Keep, gazing out at King's Landing as the sun rose. Snow still clung to corners, but patches of green emerged in the fields beyond the walls. Ships glinted in Blackwater Bay, ferrying goods from Dorne, the Reach, and even as far as the north. She inhaled the cold air and exhaled, feeling the tension of the past months begin to recede. Each trial had tested her commitment to justice and unity. Each time she had endured, guided by the knightly vows that had shaped her life. Podrick joined her on the rampart, a respectful distance behind, wearing the armor of a seasoned knight. "Your Grace, the morning council awaits. Lord Tyrion has reports on the new shipbuilding progress." She turned with a slight curve to her lips. "Thank you, Ser Podrick. Let us see what he has for us today." They descended into the castle's corridors, the faint warmth of sunshine pouring through newly cleaned windows. Servants bustled about, knights saluted, and the air thrummed with a sense of renewed hope. Brienne walked through the corridors with her steady stride, every step a reminder that she was still here, alive, ruling, determined. If the realm had once doubted the worth of a woman knight on the throne, they now saw the results, a queen who met threats head-on, who refused to be cowed by rumor or cunning foes, who served not her own vanity but the common good. In the council chamber, Tyrion stood at a broad table spread with maps and ledgers. He looked up with that clever twinkle in his eye and bowed. "Your Grace, good morning. We have much to discuss, but first I must congratulate you again on preserving the peace against yet another storm. It seems you have a knack for weathering them." Brienne joined him at the table, placing her hands on its edge. She studied the lines of trade routes, the distribution of troops, the coffers that funded reconstruction. Her realm. Her responsibility. She felt the old weight of duty, as familiar to her now as her sword's hilt. Yet it no longer burdened her so heavily. She had proven that integrity could stand against the might of gold and cunning. The more challenges would surely come, she would face them as she always had, shield raised, sword steady, heart true. She nodded to Tyrion, then to the other council members. The meeting began, a swirl of details on roads, taxes, alliances. Brienne listened closely, responded when needed. Outside, the city hummed with life. A new day dawned over Westeros, shaped by the steady hand of a queen who once was mocked for her appearance, who once had no place in the courts of power. Now she sat at the head of them, forging a reign defined by justice, compassion, and valor. And in that unwavering determination, the realm found a reason to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the worst days of blood and fire lay behind them and a better future stretched ahead under the watchful guardianship of Brienne of Tarth, the warrior queen.